hosted by the Ambassador's Bureau, which means one of our most important institutions. We will be hosted by the Ambassador's Bureau, which means no government will be an official host, although many governments will be there, supporters, supporting us, participating with us in this journey. So, drum roll, 1, 2, 3. ID4Africa 2024 will be held in Thank you. I had hoped you would share my enthusiasm for that. I think we want to be in a location right in front of the ocean, right in front of the water, with beautiful views, but also with infrastructure, hotels, and an exposition center, a conference center that is worthy of our 2,000 plus delegates representing all the African countries and the rest of the world. So we're very pleased to do that. My apologies, there is a date. I will give it to you now. It's May 21st to 23rd of 2024. The date has been fixed, so please mark your calendars. Apologies, we did not put it on the slide. Okay? So, if you are excited about this choice, please let me know. Are you excited? Excellent, excellent, excellent. Okay, so operator, please give me the slide for the agenda this afternoon. This afternoon, we're going to have a segment, a 3-segment session. So operator, could you please put up the agenda slide? In the first segment, we are going to talk about enhancing inclusion and the user experience. And it's going to consist of 4 short presentations, no more than 15 minutes each. They're going to talk to you about how they leverage technology to improve the user experience. And we are going to do it one country by country. We don't need the entire panel. And then what we will do, I ask you to submit your questions through the livecast channel, livecast@id4africa.com. Unfortunately, we have to end today at 6 o'clock precisely, and I'll tell you why. Some of you who have on the back of your badge a sticker, a discrete sticker, which says ID4Africa 2023, you were selected by the government of Kenya to attend a special function. I apologize for those who did not get the sticker, because the number was limited to 600 and we have over 1,800. So 1 in 3 could not get the sticker, and the choice and the selection was made by the government of Kenya. So I apologize in advance. It's impossible to fit 1,800 people in a banquet. So without any further delay, I would like to begin the first segment. And we are going to learn about Nimsy's mobile application, which is changing the game of digital identity management. And I'd like to call to the stage Ucha Chigbo, who's the Director, Senior Special Advisor at the National Identity Management Commission, Nigeria. Uche? Thank you so much for being with us.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back from the lunch. I'll be talking on the Nimsy mobile app today. Yesterday we had a little bit about all the verification platforms that Nimsy currently has. but today the focus will be on the Nimsy mobile app. The general concept of the mobile app that Nimsy has developed was just to put power over a person's identity back in the hands of the ID holder. The Nimsy mobile app was developed locally by Nigerians for Nigeria. And the app was designed to allow the users to be able to provision a mobile ID credential on a mobile device, and to also be able to present it at point of services or for verification purposes. We call it what we choose to call bring your own device, because we know that mobile technology has penetrated globally. So the app can be downloaded from NIMS Android Play Store or the iOS App Store. It is not just a mobile ID on the smartphone, but it's also an ecosystem for other government issue tokens to be able to plug into. You may be asking, why a mobile app? What was the business case behind this? Well, the penetration of the mobile networks, an increasing number of mobile phone subscribers in Nigeria brought about the need for us to leverage the mobile technology to provide identity services. The mobile ecosystem as well created a global digital platform for connecting people, for providing digital services, and also a huge online commerce industry. Apart from all the business cases that are listed there, we also wanted to leverage the privacy by design components based on the privacy and data protection rules and regulations that exist in Nigeria to ensure that no one person can verify any person's any user's identity without the person being known to Nimsy as well. So we try to create and innovate for identity efficiency so that people can have identity anywhere, anytime, on the go, just on their mobile devices. So those were the business cases that made us to develop the Nimsy mobile app. And for you to be able to obtain the mobile ID digital credentials, you require a phone, a smartphone, and then you also require an active NIN. And by active NIN, I mean a NIN that has been assigned to you and is on the verification portal for verification purposes. You also need a Wi-Fi data for the onboarding only. So the mobile and an active user will have a smartphone with a phone number, and then for you to onboard properly on it, you also need to generate or create a 6-digit PIN, because we also wanted to provide security, two-factor authentication, to be sure that you are the only one that can have access to that mobile app within your smartphone. There are so many features that we can see on the Nimsy mobile app. If you look at it from the board, you can see that there's a dashboard that shows you all the functionalities and the features that exist. The dashboard gives you a quick view of what the mobile app has capability for. You have the Show Your ID, where you can basically just display either your basic ID information, which could be your picture, and then your full names. Then there's also an opportunity for you to also display your full ID information, which gives you picture, your full name, together with your date of birth, your nationality, and your gender as well. There is also a feature in the mobile app that enables us to also generate a tokenized NIN, the NIN. That feature allows the ID holder to generate and issue a tokenized NIN for verification, either at point of service to a merchant or a service provider that they are seeking service from. Another feature that is also in the mobile ID app that we have is opportunity for ID holders to be also able to print their improved NIN slip. We have an intelligent NIN slip that has an Aztec QR code that people can actually download and print out. It's pocket size, so you can download it, you can print it out, and it's paper, you can print it on a paper, and any ID holder does not have any restriction on the number of times they can print that improved NIN slip. So that also enables users to be able to do that as well. The mobile app also has a functionality for you to link your mobile numbers. With the NIM-SIM linkage policy in Nigeria, every mobile phone with a SIM and the owner of the mobile phone is required by policy to go and link their SIM to their NIN. So within the app is also a module for linking those numbers. And for now, as a matter of policy, up to 7 numbers, mobile phone numbers, can be linked. This was taken into consideration because we have individuals in Nigeria who own or have about 2 mobile phone numbers and also have 2 or more Wi-Fi routers for internet access, and a lot of people that also have IoT devices at home. So that's why we limited it to 7 mobile numbers as a matter of policy. A critical feature of the Nimsy mobile app is the tokenization model that we also have. To meet the rising challenges of data theft, data harvesting, and unauthorized access to personal information, we decided to introduce the NIN tokenization feature in the app. That tokenization of the NIN simply allows the ID holder to mask their national identification number so that the raw NIN is not always given or exposed for authentication or verification purposes. The tokenization feature also gives the ID holder the right to issue those tokenized NIN to any merchant or service provider who wishes to verify them. The token itself has an expiration timeline of 72 hours. And the vendor is also, and it's vendor specific, meaning that any token that was generated with an enterprise code of a service provider or a merchant cannot be transferred to any other merchant or used by any other merchant. Can you please play the video?
Hello everyone. Did you know that your identity can now be verified anywhere, anytime, with ease while keeping your data safe at all times? The NIN tokenization is a solution designed to protect your data from harvesting, cloning, and duplication. Wondering how tokenization works? It's simple. Step 1. Download the Nimsy mobile ID from the App Store. Step 2. Click on Generate Virtual NIN tab. Step 3. Input or search the enterprise ID or scan the QR code of the enterprise requesting your NIN. Step 4. Copy your virtual NIN and present it to the verifying agent. This token expires after 72 hours and cannot be used by any other enterprise. You don't have a smartphone? Don't worry. Simply dial *346 *3 *NIN *enterprise ID hashtag. The enterprise code will be issued by the verifying agent. NIN tokenization. Own your identity. Secure your identity.
Okay. So what the video is simply telling us that it's not only people that have smartphones that can issue a tokenized NIN. People with feature phones can also use a USSD code to also generate and issue a tokenized NIN to any merchant or service provider. We did that so that we'll make sure that we provide an inclusive system for everyone. Also, we have a user consent policy implemented in the Nimsy mobile app as well. The user consent is implemented in such a way that the ID holder will approve prior to data usage or sharing with third party that they want their data to be verified, and that at the point of service, they can also use the enterprise code of the merchant to generate the tokenized NIN for ID verification and access to service. The user consent also enables the ID holder to also be able to use his or her ID through see the use of the ID through a statistics option that is available within the app. There is also a timestamp and log of all verifications that are performed using the mobile app, whether there's a success or a failure rate, and the user ID that perform those particular verifications as well. Like I explained earlier, an ID holder can choose either the basic information to be seen or the full information that can be seen at the point of verification. The idea behind all of this is just to empower an ID holder and ensure transparency in the use and processing of personal information, thereby enforcing privacy for all NIN ID holders. As we move on, we've try to also do a lot of public awareness and utilization to increase the adoption and the use of the tokenization feature of the Nimsy mobile app. We've done that by one-on-one stakeholder engagement, trying to explain to all the ID stakeholders the processes, the benefits behind the tokenization feature, and how they can leverage it in providing verification for all. We've also done general public awareness creation through all the available channels that we have in Nimsy, through our enrollment and registration centers, the website, our social media handles, through TVs, newspaper ads, and also radio jingles and various videos, just like the video that we just played today. We also have leveraged word of mouth because we've seen that sometimes word of mouth also works very well. So we are encouraging Nimsy to talk to all our family members and our friends and then introduce them to the mobile app and the tokenization feature and encourage them to also go to their own family, friends, and relations and the community and also introduce them to that. That has really worked for us in Nimsy as well. And in terms of implementation, we've been doing sectoral implementation because we cannot bring everybody on board at the same time. So we've been taking it sector by sector. We've been able to sensitize the telecommunication center in Nigeria, and they're currently using the tokenization feature of the mobile app, and we've been moving to all the other sectors as well. This is to make sure that we properly educate them, enlighten them, and then make sure that they understand it and they are able to integrate their systems with our own for that to work properly. This is just a quick status of the app utilization. You can see that we've had over 17 million downloads of the mobile app, and over 78 million digital profiles have been created, with over 5 million improved NIN slips downloaded and printed as well. And then we've performed over 67 million verifications using the mobile app. Right now, we are the latest version of the app, which is 4.4.0, that has newer interfaces, new icons for smoother operations, and also the statistics that I mentioned, with support for the wearables. My DG mentioned the wearables, the Apple Watch, and the Android Wear, where you can now prove your identity without taking out your phone as well. And then the mobile app also deploys and uses the ISO standards and the IEC 7064 MOD 127_36 as a check digit algorithm for the issuance of the virtual NIN. From the feedbacks that we have gotten from members of the society, from all the ID stakeholders, we've planned new versions and updates for the mobile app. These newer technologies will be included in the future updates that we are currently working on, and it's including the biometric authentication in-app, and we are planning to leverage the facial recognition, the liveness checks. And we also are considering the PKI cryptography as part of security for the mobile app, where digital certificates and document signing can also be implemented to secure elements of many devices that are using it. In conclusion, I just want to say that, yes, you may think, oh, this is for elitists or people that have smartphones, but from what I have said already, you can see that ID holders that have future phones can also issue tokenized NIN, but then it's part of all the alternative channels that Nimsy is currently deploying to make sure that we have multiple modes of identity verification on the go. So that's basically what the Nimsy mobile app is all about. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Uche. Actually, I want to ask you a very quick question. 17 million people downloaded the mobile app, but yesterday we heard 100 million people have the NIN. How do you explain the 17% versus the 100 million? Is there no capacity for them to use it? Is there skill sets that are not high enough? Please explain that.
The challenge that we currently have is the challenge of awareness creation and sensitizing people to come on board. We know that is a very huge challenge for us, and we're working on that. We're planning on having so many other workshops to bring all the other sectors that have not joined or onboarded onto the mobile app to do so. So it's a challenge of publicity, education, and sensitization.
Are you using sort of social media influencers that could get this thing viral and get people to download it.
Yes, that's one of the recommendations that have been put forward. So we intend to leverage on all the ID ambassadors that we have to be able to push it forward.
Okay. We look forward to you reporting to us next year on your progress. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please join me. Okay, so we're going to continue again with the theme on mobile apps and on the service of identity with Ethiopia's Super Fida app and pre-registration. It's another use of technology to enhance inclusion, empowering users and accelerating inclusion. I will call to the screen two people who will share the podium. Al Shifro, who's the Senior Advisor to the National ID Program Ethiopia, and Mina Awol Abdo, who's the Stakeholder Engagement Lead, National ID Program Ethiopia, who will speak in 15 minutes about their experience with mobile apps. Thank you, Al. Nice to have you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, ID4Africa, for this invitation. It's been a wonderful couple of days. So I'm going to start with a couple of slides. It's going to be a little bit speaking, and my colleague Mina will be talking about the FIDA app more specifically. So I'll give you a big update on Ethiopia, what has been going on for the last 1 year. So a bit of a background: in Ethiopia, we have a very strong resident ID program that's paper-based, decentralized, and what has given the National ID program a big advantage over this is a strong public demand for digital ID. In fact, in our case in Ethiopia, we can go fast enough. You know, the public is constantly demanding and pressuring us to move much faster on the digital ID program. And what's been unique and what we believe is an advantage in our country is that it's the people that are leading and the government is following. I think it's a very important model to ensure, because you want to make sure that it's not product-led, it's not technology-led. You get the public seeing the value and seeing and having an understanding of what it can bring in to their day-to-day lives. So we have a lot of goodwill as we do this work. So the other piece of background is in Ethiopia, the ID, digital ID is seen as in the 10-year national development plan, as well as in the Digital Ethiopia 2025 plan. So we often talk about foundational systems versus functional systems when we talk about ID. But what we've learned in Ethiopia, what we've done in Ethiopia is that having a government buy-in and commitment is actually a much more stronger foundational system. So once you secure that, then you can go into building on the technology front. To this end, those of you who have followed the Ethiopian ID program for many years may realize that it has been housed in various government institutions. Currently, the Ethiopian ID program sits with the... I didn't see that, sorry. Apologize. All right, guys. I'm not too far out. So as you see on the left, you have the background, and then we're going to be the approaches, and then status. I'm still talking about the background section. So the National ID program being identified as a national development plan of the 10-year plan, as well as the digital ID, the Digital Ethiopia 2025 plan is documented, and we have the support of the government. So the National ID program is sitting in the Prime Minister's office. This is unique from the previous iterations where it was housed in different ministries. And what this shows is a strong demonstration and commitment by the government of the importance of digital ID. Another component that we've done very uniquely in Ethiopia is bringing the whole of government approach. This is quite important because, in some cases what we've learned from experience is you build your national ID system, you do your enrollment, and then when it comes to linking it to use cases, linking it to integration, you get a hiccup, right? So in our case, it's demonstrated by the number of people that we have in this conference. We have a number of agencies and functional departments that are also actively participating in the national ID program of the country. The other piece has to do with looking at and messaging ID as an infrastructure. We believe that a lot of years and time has been spent and a bit wasted talking about ID as if it's a product or a system, and that was a very difficult message to get through. However, when we start talking about ID as an infrastructure, that's something that governments quickly can grab on and understand and make sense of. So we've gotten a lot of mileage out of this. And to the point that I made a few minutes earlier, having this understanding that ID is an infrastructure on which a number of e-gov services that the Ethiopian government is rapidly deploying means that we can quickly and easily integrate the ID system on those functional systems. So moving on to approach. So those of you who follow the ID for Africa program, you may have heard the Eye on Ethiopia program, and I give credit to Dr. Atik here. He helped coin the term sovereignty from the start. So in Ethiopia, we take this issue super, super seriously. So sovereignty is grounded in the way we design and plan and execute this program. So one of the advantages of being sort of a latecomer to the ID program has been lessons that we've learned from other countries. So for us in Ethiopia, sovereignty is not something about hosting your data on a basement, right? Or it's not even going and grabbing an open source software. We really want to define the term in the most truest, fullest sense, that we want to be able to take that product, localize it, and be able to manage it and operate it within the country using local staff and Ethiopians. Even better, if possible, right? We aim to take on this expertise and have our people and expertise available for other African countries or other countries around the world. So this is a very core to the work that we're doing. So we're making sure that we have the skills, and we've been building on this for some time. Now, if we talk about sovereignty, you better be talking about capacity building, right? It's just not going to get you that far if you talk all about sovereignty, but you don't have the people to do it. So for the last couple of years, especially for the last year and a half or so, we've been investing a lot on our people. And I'm not just talking about tech right now. I'm talking about operations. I'm talking about people who understand the legal framework and the policy and so on. So here, I'm proud to mention that we're very proud of the work that we've done with the MOSIP program. The Ethiopian developers and technical staff have been responsible in developing and evolving the product that we have used in Ethiopia so far. Another point is a very strong focus on the private sector. It is not possible for us to assume and expect the government to do the national rollout. So the National ID program is focused on designing the National ID program, sort of shepherding it and providing oversight, but we expect the private sector to take that and integrate it and support on the rollout process. For this, we've already published our APIs very early in the game. I think some of you who are focused on Ethiopia know this quite well. So again, the government is focused on doing the initial rollout, and then the integration will happen. When it comes to the legal mandate, we're very proud that we've managed to get the National ID program, the National ID proclamation passed, and we thank partners and different agencies have been supporting us, giving us feedback, and to the point that we now have the rules in place. Another piece that was also done was ensuring that we stick to very minimal sets of records. So we have 5 data sets that we collect: date, name, date of birth, gender, address, and nationality. All right. So when it comes to, so the 3 major status updates. One is the National ID proclamation that I mentioned about. We also have about 1.5 million digital ID credentials, and we have integrations already done with about 11 institutions. We mentioned about the 10, the tax ID registrations that's now gone live over the last few months. So talking about innovation, my colleague Mina will continue about this. So when it comes to the legal mandate, we were very deliberate in making sure that we have the legal backing. That included inclusion criteria into the legal proclamations. We've translated, and we're in the process of translating our documentations in multiple languages around Ethiopia. We have about 80 different languages in Ethiopia. When it comes to access points, we're focused on leveraging private sector as well as public sector networks that will help us increase reach and inclusion. Technology, we're working on offline registrations, authentications as well, and multi-platform support, again, my colleague will describe. And last but not least, there's a lot of focus on pre-registration that will allow us to take the time that it takes to onboard as many people as possible, and then the Fida mobile app that Mina will be discussing next. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. So my colleague has given you a very good context of what the National ID program is doing. So what I'm going to do for you is I'm going to show you how we're using the FIDA application and the pre-registration to enhance user experience and inclusion within the country. So when we're talking about the pre-registration, which is the first topic I'm going to cover, for enrolling people into a national ID or a digital ID, onboarding is the first crucial step. It is the touch point to the resident, and it's going to happen with every single individual within the country. So for us, onboarding is very important, and majority of you here, you've done onboarding for your different services, whether it be digital ID, finance sector, or so many others. But the big question that we have is how efficient is our onboarding system? And so a lot of you have different solutions to how efficient your onboarding system is. But for national ID, we prioritize on using technology to stretch the resources that we have so that we could be accessible to majority of the residents, or ideally 100% of the residents within the country. And so this solution one of the solutions for our program, for the National ID program, is pre-registration, because it helps us stretch the technologies that we have while also creating a more encouraging and a more friendly registration system for the residents. And so this pre-registration is basically the registration of a person's demographics data, taking of their consent, as well as their documentation beforehand. So when you're talking about this pre-registration, it's a very simple process that we have deployed. It's currently effective within the country. A person can easily go to our website, which is id.gov.et, click the register here button, and then start their process of pre-registration. So what they do is they do a simple OTP login or using their phone number. After that, they put in their demographics data, give out their consent to registering for digital ID, as it is not a mandatory, but it's a right within the Ethiopian context, upload their proof of identity and their proof of address. And then after that, they get to pick a very specific time and date where they could go by a registration center in the banking sector, in the telco sector, or in the ministry, and then they could give out their demographics data within a short amount of time and go about their business or about their day. And so this, what it does for the people is, it lets them know that when they do pre-registration, they don't have to go to a center and wonder, am I going to get a service? Is it going to be a queue? What it does for us is it makes sure that they are guaranteed that they're going to get their registration service. It's going to take a much more shorter time, and they could easily be done with it and go about their day. So that is what the pre-registration is. And when we're looking at its, so I'm going to go back, and I think I missed, yeah. So you see a feature right by the bottom. It says your application, and it has a few application on points. That's my favorite part about the pre-registration that we have. It's that it considers the digitally illiterate as well. In Ethiopia, there is a very common practice, as I'm sure happens within the African continent, is that we use digital navigators or aided services to navigate digital services within the country. So what our pre-registration does, by the feature that you just saw, is that it helps facilitate this. So parents can use their children, communities can use any communal aided services that they have available to access this pre-registration. So it's not just limited to a person having access to a smartphone, to a computer, or to an internet connection, or let alone knowing or being able to navigate the digital world. It's that they would be able to use that feature you see over there to register 100 people, for example. I could sit down, register 100 people, and I could give them access to this amazing pre-registration service that we have here. But in addition to that, it has obviously great benefits for us in terms of efficiency, in terms of managing resources and time, making it more accessible, while also at the same time encouraging people to easily register for their digital ID. And so before I move on to the next, I would say that I'm sure there are different legal residents of Ethiopia within this audience, so I would definitely advise you to give this a try and maybe get your digital ID within the country. It's not limited to citizens. So the next one that I am going to go over is the FIDA app that we have. So the standard FIDA app that we have, where majority of us deploy mobile ID, is to give access to digital credentials. And so that is what our standard FIDA ID does. But as I mentioned, his colleague, the National ID program has a more use case-centered approach, whereby we use the resident-facing service providers to register for digital ID. And so when it comes to deploying this FIDA app, what makes it very special is that we integrate with existing resident service-facing applications to deploy this FIDA app and have access to your digital ID. And a great example of that we have deployed within the country is our Telever app. So Telever is a mobile wallet that's backed by the Ethio Telecom within the Ethiopia. In short, it's M-Pesa for Ethiopia, and it has about 30 million subscribers. So what we did is we integrated with this existing application within the country that has 30 million subscribers, and then we have the national ID there. So a person using the Telever or any other resident-facing application that they could log in through there and have easy access to their credentials. So as you can see here, this is already existing within the Telever app. If you're ever in Addis, please do try it. This is already deployed, and anyone who has digital ID has access to this. So we do have this. We do have use case-centered approaches, but everything has a pros and cons. So when you're using this use case-centered strategies, what happens is you create a bigger bridge between yourself and the resident. And we understand that with this approach, we are going to have that. So which is why we actually do have the FIDA super app, which gives you the full service to the digital ID, updating your informations, generating your printable credentials, generating your QR code, which is what we call the FIDA encode for offline authentication, and so and so. So this super app is there for the additional services, but to get easy access to your credentials, you don't have to download this app. You could use it with any other front-facing resident applications that are already existing within the country. So I think I am out of time, but we are using this product to facilitate the move that Ethiopia is doing into the digital world. And I hope you found this informative. And I'm sure if you guys have any questions, you can easily reach out to me, and I'd be more than happy to answer them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I want to make one comment. It's quite insightful, the name that you've used, FIDA. Don't tell us what it is. I want to ask the audience, how many of you know what the word FIDA means in any language, in Arabic, in your local language? Raise your hand. Okay. Could you tell us what FIDA means?
So in Ethiopian context, it means value. But I did get to learn yesterday in Swahili, it means profit. So exactly. All the very best.
And in Arabic, it also means benefit. Benefit, profit, and value. So this captures the essence of digital identity to people. So by using the right word, you're actually influencing the positioning of that program. So congratulations. Thank you very much. Thank you both very much. We look forward to seeing you again in the future and hearing about your progress. Okay, we have a slight change because the next presentation was supposed to be from Benin, and it's in French. So we want to allow you to get the headsets. So we're switching it with the next one, which is the Aadhaar Touching Lives with Face Authentication. This is a fascinating topic, and I'd like to ask Sanjeev Yadav, Director of Authentication from the Unique ID Authorities of India, to come and share with us their experience. Thank you for being with us. Please, in the meantime, grab a headphone. There will be people walking around. If you need translation, interpretation services, get a headphone for the next one, which is also exciting.
Aadhaar, a dream which was thought of 14 years back, which was once unthinkable. However, due to political willpower and IT superpower of India, today Aadhaar has created a Nike of itself into the world showing way for many countries to replicate this model successfully in their systems. A very warm good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Sanjeev Yadav, Director of Authentication and Verification from Unique Identification Authority of India. In past 2 days, a lot has been spoken about Aadhaar, but today I will be specifically referring to use of face authentication in UIDI ecosystem. Before I start, I would like to thank Government of Kenya and Dr. Joseph Attic for hosting me here. This is forward. So, as you all are aware that Aadhaar is the biggest I have to go. Got it. So, as you all are aware that Aadhaar is biggest biometric digital identity system in the world. Today, as we speak, we have got 1.36 billion live Aadhaars, 1.36 billion people in India and having 1.27 billion Aadhaar. The difference is the floating population of 0 to 5 years, which are in various stages of formation of Aadhaar. India still have got highest penetration of mobile subscribers, 1.2 billion, highest subscriber of internet, 840 million, and highest bank accounts, 1.4 billion. So face authentication has been launched for creating a ease of use for leveraging all these benefits. When a resident is enrolled, we capture certain biometric and demographic attributes. So these include, when we say demographic attribute, this includes name, gender, date of birth, address, email, mobile number. These are demographic attributes. And in biometric attributes, we are capturing face, finger, iris, all 10 fingers, both iris and face of the resident. And that is how, once these are captured, 1:n deduplication is carried out. That means out of this repository of 1.36 billion, that packet is matched with each data to ensure that there is uniqueness of biometrics which have been captured. Now we come to topic of today. This is authentication. When we say authentication, so authentication is basically proving yourself who you are to be. So authentication, again, we are providing multi-mode of authentication, which includes demographic, biometric, OTP based. Again, there are two kinds of facilities into authentication. One is yes, no, and eKYC. Like in morning, President also spoke about eKYC. In yesterday's session, there were a lot of speakers, those who spoke about eKYC. So in yes, no, we take either one of the demographic or multiple demographic attributes along with 12-digit Aadhaar number or 16-digit VID number. This packet is sent to CIDR and you get response in yes and no. And this is 100% matching of the attribute which has been sent. Again, by means of biometric, we can do yes-no authentication. That means I give my Aadhaar number, there is a biometric device, I give my biometrics, and I get a response in yes and no. When I say eKYC, eKYC is done by OTP and biometric, and in biometric, again by face, finger, iris. Any of the attribute or in combination, they can be used for biometric authentication. And in eKYC, we are throwing little more data, that is photograph of the resident, all demographic attributes which includes name, gender, date of birth, address. Now, certain issues were observed with finger and iris. Currently, there are around 80 million transactions which are taking place in UIDI ecosystem every day, and 70% of these transactions are biometric transactions. And majority of these are fingerprint transactions. So roughly, you can say approximately 55 million transactions per day are fingerprint transactions. But certain observations, or you can say certain problems have been observed. To fill in this gap, we have introduced face authentication. So what are these problems? We'll have a look one by one. Firstly is, we all are aware that because of age and for manual labor, in farm labor, there is generally damage of minutiae. And because of this, authenticating with fingerprint is little difficult. Although we are providing facility of best finger detection, but still, residents find it difficult to authenticate with fingerprint. Then in extreme cold climates, we all are aware that India is not a country, it's a continent itself. At any point of the time, temperatures are ranging from -20 to +40, 50. So at cold climate, generally we tend to apply some lubricant on our skin, and because of this also, certain time, biometric failure has been observed. In children, biometrics are not developed, so we are not capturing biometric till the age of 5 for children. Also, some failure can be attributed to machine which can be poor scanner efficiency, unclean platen. They can also contribute to failure in authentication. And also, fingerprint authentication is a contact authentication, and COVID has shown us the way that we have to move from contact authentication towards contactless authentication. Certain kind of issues were observed into iris also. First of this is template aging. So template aging means the time when iris was captured, and with age, generally there is deterioration in iris. So this may sometimes lead to failure of iris authentication. Cyclotorsion, when there is degree of rotation of eye around visual axis while authenticating. A trained operator is required for iris authentication. Then iris authentication, they uses iris device, so they are not portable device. They cannot be embedded into mobile. Even if they are embedded into mobile, generally these are little costly devices. And children, again, iris is not matured, so till the age of 0 to 5, we don't capture iris. So, like I mentioned, to cover this gap, we launched face authentication. So, the face authentication was launched during COVID time, and it has been widely accepted. But there were certain hitches when we launched face authentication, and it is improving with each passing day. So, this is completely Make in India initiative, completely in-house UIDI production. I got development team also sitting here with me. This is again an alternative method where residents are not able to authenticate themselves with biometric attribute, that is finger and iris. Before launching, we have conducted a comprehensive POC, which ranged over a year plus and sample ranging into millions. And before launch, we perfected, or you can say nearly perfected the application. And with continuous feedback, we have been improving face authentication today also. So certain initial challenges which we faced, first there were certain technical challenges and legal or other challenges. So it was firstly, residents have to be aware of handling of mobile phone, because when you are not looking into camera directly, there is problem that in northern part of India, generally people, especially women, they put veil, gungat or burqa. So they are shy of coming in front of camera. So this also was a problem which was observed initially. Then we have got diverse ethnicity in India. So this takes time for algorithm to mature. And also there were certain legal challenges when we initially rolled out. In India, we have got something called as right to information. So this provides a power into hands of citizens that they can ask questions related to services being launched by India or the Indian government. And also privacy concerns, because people were confusing authentication with recognition. So that's why we put this definition on our website, so that all these concerns of residents are taken care of. There were certain technical challenges, and biggest of them was variety of mobile phones which are available into ecosystem, and variety of OS. Now with each passing day, face authentication is finding a wider acceptance, and as you can see from the viewfoil, we started with just 0.38 million in September 22, which rose to approximately 1 million in the month of December 22, and today it has crossed 10 million transactions per month and counting. So this particular an escalation into month of December, you can see, because a campaign was launched for digital life certificate, which I will be presenting in subsequent slides. So as you can see, face authentication is one application with multiple opportunities. It is opening a sea of options for residents to use, or they can avail any kind of facility, government or non-government, by means of face authentication, which includes Aadhaar-enabled biometric attendance system, banking, beneficiary registrations, life certificates, dispersal of state and central benefits, verification of students, farmer registration, and digital e-sign. So, for government offices, biometric attendance is compulsory. So again, this is a mobile-based application which can be both in assisted or non-assisted mode. When I say assisted mode, there is a system which is placed there. You can use that system, or there is a person behind this system. Or when I say unassisted mode, or you can say this is self-assist mode, in which a resident downloads the application on its mobile and they are able to use this application for authenticating themselves. Now, government has launched variety of direct benefit transfer. So in session 1, you heard a little introduction about Indian government DBT schemes. So I just give an example. One such scheme is MG Narega. This is Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. So Government of India guarantees 100 days of employment to underprivileged person, so they can register themselves with help of Aadhaar, and they can avail this facility. So this is again a mobile-based application which is with resident, or it can be in assisted mode. Yeah, sorry. Again now, for children, there are variety of scholarship schemes and admission procedure which require authentication of children. And for children, there cannot be any other identity other than Aadhaar, because Aadhaar, almost every children in India have got Aadhaar. Also, it has, by means of face authentication, for example, entrance test is conducted. You are all aware that India has got highest population, so there are many applicants. So starting from filling of the application till test is conducted, till admission procedure, there is authentication at various stages. And face authentication has been facilitating these procedures. Now there is JAM Trinity. This is vision of Prime Minister of India, in which there are variety of benefits which have been given to citizens, then coupled with Aadhaar and mobile connectivity. I already gave you a glimpse that India has got highest mobile connectivity in the world. So with this JAM Trinity, we are able to give all kind of benefits to the citizens sitting at home. Like I mentioned, for pensioners, they have to give digital life certificate once in a year. So now they don't have to go to the bank. Sitting at home, by means of face authentication, they can carry out their authentication and generate digital life certificate, which will directly go to the bank, and bank will continue giving pension benefits to the residents. National Health Authority have launched variety of products in India. In COVID era, COVID application, when entire world was struggling with mapping of residents or COVID mapping, India has launched COVID application, which is again Aadhaar-based registration by means of face authentication, and you can check your vaccination, you can show your vaccination pass, you can come to know when your vaccination is due, and this is completely contactless. And apart from this, there are other medical schemes also which have been launched on face authentication. you develop, you download this application and authenticate yourself. You can take appointment from doctor. You can get cashless benefit from hospitals. Again, a lot of state governments have launched schemes, and these are door-to-door schemes. A tablet tablet or mobile phone is given to the correspondent. He goes to the resident, and from door to door, these services are delivered. Banking, there are a variety of banking products. Erstwhile, while opening a bank account, you apply to the bank, a banking correspondent will come to your doorstep, or by means of video. Generally, onboarding of customer was done, but now you just download that application, do face authentication, and your bank account is open. DigiYatra is recently launched application again on face authentication. You register yourself on DigiYatra by means of face authentication, and your face becomes your boarding pass. So, like I mentioned, face authentication in UID ecosystem is opening oceans of opportunities. It is enabling digital citizenship and enabling ease of life for citizens. And a lot of services are provided at doorstep. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Actually, stay.
Yeah. Can you play the video?
Actually, we'll play it in a second. Sanjeev, stay on the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to make a confession. And this is an important one because it's a public confession that shows why I am twice now indebted to Aadhaar and the Unique ID Authority of India. The first time was in the middle of 2000s when we did theoretical calculations about the scalability of identity using biometrics. We showed theoretically that you could scale to several billion. People ridiculed us. They thought we were completely ridiculous. This will never work. Nandan Nilikani believed in it, and he proved it empirically, and now everybody believes that this works. So in a way, the theoretical calculations were proven correct by this massive laboratory called Unique Identity Authority of India. That's one. So we thank you for making us look good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Another one. Face recognition. For many years, I have borne the guilt because everybody kept saying, you are the father of face recognition and you have created a monster, face surveillance everywhere, and it's going to create things that take our privacy away. And of course, I dissociated myself from face recognition and I kept saying, you can't use face recognition. Now you showed me and you showed the world that face recognition, when used responsibly for authentication, can be a powerful tool for inclusion. Those elderly people who cannot use otherwise their biometrics are now able to participate in society because of their face. So you've essentially rehabilitated us once again. We thank you for proving that face is not evil. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Please. The laboratory of the world is the UID Authority of India. Thank you. So now we're ready to continue with another interesting tool for inclusion from Benin on something called the FID certificate, a novel standards-based credential for mass inclusion. And here we are going to have this in French, so please put your headsets. I'll have Dr. Jean Awulo, National Coordinator from Muri, Benin, and Marielle Atonde, Technical Operations Manager from Muri, Benin. Bienvenue. Merci beaucoup d'être parmi nous.
Merci.
OK.
Oui, oui. Merci. Merci pour cette opportunité offerte au Bénin et offerte, dirais-je même, à tous les pays de l'Afrique de l'Ouest francophone et pour porter, à travers le Bénin, pour porter la voix par rapport aux changements qui s'opèrent dans cette partie de l'Afrique. Avec l'inauguration de la nouvelle gouvernance au Bénin depuis 2016, le processus, cette gouvernance a rendu possible, disais-je, les changements, la transformation digitale du pays. Ainsi, successivement, à partir de 2016, le Bénin a mis en place le registre national biométrique des personnes physiques. Cette base biométrique qui compte environ 12 millions de personnes a rendu possible en termes digital un certain nombre d'actions. Ainsi, nous avons commencé par mettre en œuvre la délivrance des cartes nationales biométriques. Avec s'est rendu compte que très tôt, nous avons eu la carte nationale biométrique avec la carte de citoyenneté, comme la plupart dans nos pays, comme dans la plupart de nos pays. Et ainsi, il était nécessaire de recourir maintenant à une attestation d'identité qui permettra à tout le monde d'avoir accès à son numéro personnel d'identification qui était déjà attribué à partir du registre national des personnes physiques. Cette attestation est rendue possible par l'adhésion du Bénin, comme 6 autres pays, à l'initiative Ouri, entendu, projet d'identification unique pour l'intégration régionale et l'inclusion en Afrique de l'Ouest. En travaillant de concert avec les autres pays participants, nous avons pu mettre en œuvre ce qui est célébré aujourd'hui et qui est connu sous l'appellation du certificat FID ou encore certificat du numéro personnel d'identification. Très bien. Donc, c'est un certificat qui, contrairement à tout ce que nous avons entendu depuis hier, c'est une attestation d'identité qui n'est pas sur un support biométrique, qui n'est pas sur un support à 4 appuis, disais-je. Le point fait aujourd'hui avec l'expérience de la mise en œuvre de cette attestation révèle fort bien une forte pénétration sur le plan national qui fait que nous avons aujourd'hui déjà généré plus de 6 millions de cette attestation, soit 29% distribués en ligne et 70% produits physiquement au profit de toute la population béninoise. Ceci est rendu possible grâce en tenant compte de 2 éléments. Les originalités normatives implémentées et les innovations structurelles mises en place par le gouvernement. Parlant des originalités normatives, il faut recourir au fondement juridique aujourd'hui en cours au Bénin, qui, depuis 2017, grâce à la loi 2017 portant identification des personnes en République du Bénin, cette loi a permis, comme je le disais tantôt, de mettre en place le registre national des personnes physiques durant 6 mois à partir d'une opération dénommée le recensement administratif à vocation d'identification des personnes. Et suite à cette loi, il est intervenu un certain nombre de tests d'application, notamment le décret portant mise en œuvre du registre national des personnes physiques et le décret relatif au numéro personnel d'identification. C'est ce que nous connaissons habituellement sous l'appellation de l'identifiant unique attribué à chaque personne. Et ce numéro, à partir de ce cadre juridique qui impose à chaque citoyen, à chaque population résidant au Bénin de disposer de son numéro personnel d'identification, et le numéro est unique, fort de ses caractères, il est unique et inintelligible et non répétitif. Il est exigé, à travers les tests, il est exigé dans l'accomplissement de toutes les opérations administratives au Bénin. Fort de ce décret, alors, le numéro personnel d'identification est aussi exigé pour l'accès au niveau du service public que privé.
Public and private institutions, and also to share data between the public services and the private enterprises. It is availed. It is availed to the population from a number of documents. So not only the personal identity card, the national identity card, and also the certificate that gives the personal identification number, which we now call the FID certificate. Now, what are the traits? What are the fundamental the characteristics of this certificate? It is a certificate that can be given, delivered on a simple support. It's basic, at a very low price, and without distinction of nationality. It is the inclusive trait of this certificate, and it is also a certificate that does not expire, which means the validity is unlimited. The FID card also allows us to, what does it allow us to do in Benin? In Benin, it also allows you to provide proof of one's identity in Benin, and just to show this is me. Like I said, the name that is given here is truly my name, and also to identify and authenticate individuals who present themselves for services in certain in health, education institutions, and other social services, and also to amplify or extend services for the most vulnerable. So this also has been able to bridge the gap in terms of access to identity through a document that is recognized by the government. On the basis of this, the work that was carried out within the regional committees that worked on it, the FID system, which allowed us to generate this card, also simplifies the interoperability with the system of the service providers, which is known as Road and Benin, X Road. So for that, it is possible to identify and authenticate the beneficiary of the service of social programs and also that have been implemented. We have basic social services, we have financial services, we also have land matters, financial, and also the GSM operators. We foresee that the FID system within the countries will allow, with time, the interoperability at a regional level, and also allow recognition, mutual recognition of the certificate that is presented to identify an individual. The support that allows for its delivery has a specific traits. Now these are the singularity, the uniqueness of this card. So this aspect that is inclusive, and irrespective of who is holding it, we are able to, we can print it. Noticed that the government also got the support of the World Bank to be able to have this distributed freely to all the population. In terms of penetration, the advantages are seen by and by, because these card at the regional level, these advantages are amongst all others: contribution to the economy, the improvement of the efficiency of the public sector, particularly the finance and the telecommunications sector, and also encourages today the movement of people. So there is more circulation of people, which is good. And this also allows us the development of interregional commerce that is being worked on, and also the generation of revenue of fiscal generation, that should be another of the advantages. Other some services other than the experience that we've seen in Benin, we also have services that are also attached to this certificate. These are amongst others those that are already in use. The FID certificate as a justification of identification of a person gives access to basic services and also favors financial inclusion through the microfinancing. It also facilitates electronic communication and also the identification at a high level. When we come to social services, this card also allows to be beneficiaries a certain number of social without going back to the biometric card, which was more expensive. And this is also good. The people know that the government is willing to let them have it. And we can say today that this card has had a very strong impact on the education system, given the constitution of the different groups of when we work out the profile of our students. And this card also allows job seekers to also find something, have something easily that can be used to identify them, other than going for a search over for a biometric, the traditional biometric card. So these are some of the key characteristics that are linked to this certificate of basic identification, which has already been implemented today in Benin. And I'd like to invite Marielle, the technical responder, who is also going to explain some details on the technical aspects of this certificate.
Merci. Thank you very much. I'll start by presenting what helped us to create the personal identification certificate. This certificate comes from two bases. We have the RNPP database, and we have also exploited the PKI, which is the public key infrastructure, and we have ensure interoperability of these two systems in order to produce the personal identification certification, in order to make it possible to have access to authentication services, and also create interface and make available identification services. The certificate of personal identification is 86 millimeters long and 54 millimeters wide. It has information including the face of the person and nominative and minimal information, including the name, the surname, the first name, the date of birth, the gender, and the personal identification number. The personal identification number is issued after the person's information is entered in the register for physical people. It is an intelligible number which is given to every person that is entered in the register. And at the back of the card, you have a QR code which is big enough of model 2, and the correction model level that we have is M. This QR code helps to ensure authentication in full offline mode. You can use authentication without using internet or even making requests from the database. In this QR code, we have encrypted the same information that are provided on the identification personal card, including the photo, but we have encoded the picture in black and white, and we have been able to have a size of 300 bytes. The model of the QR code that we have adopted in order to encrypt the personal data was made using the JSON Web Token, which helps to have the content which has information that we have on the face of the certificate and the signature. The signature ensures the integrity of non-alteration of the information that will be used with the authentication services. These are the technical aspects that I can present as far as this certificate is concerned. Thank you very much.
I just want to quickly underline why I selected this presentation. In fact, in our rush to embrace technology, especially with the mobile and the fancy things that are happening in the world, I was worried that we are forgetting about those who don't have access, who need to have something so inexpensive that it costs few cents so that they can actually participate. This is a great, great achievement on the part of Benin, for maximal inclusion. So please connect with them and understand how they did it, because it is something that is going to help inclusion. So thank you very much for this presentation. Merci beaucoup. Très bientôt. Okay, now we're getting into segment 2, which is going to be into the heart of this event, building digital public infrastructure. And the segment is going to consist of a short 20-minute keynote presentation by the man who is really at the heart of digital public infrastructure, Pramod Varma, Dr. Pramod Varma. Pramod does not need introduction. I just think you need to read his title only. His title actually is a resume of all the wonderful things that have been done in the last decade. He is the co-chair of the Center for DPI. He is the ex-chief architect of Aadhaar, and he's the ex-chief architect of the India Stack. Pramod, please join me on the stage for a presentation on the India Stack experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good. You can hear me, right? Good afternoon. Is the deck on? Can someone put up the deck, please? Okay. So I have 20 minutes, and is maybe even less. I think we are running short of time. So I'm going to go a little bit fast. So it's hard for some of you to catch up. But I'm hoping that I can leave the deck behind, and we are accessible from Center for Digital Public Infrastructure. So do reach out later if you want to understand. This is important to understand. India is really large, and now the most populous nation on earth. We also are very, very diverse. 600 plus languages, very different cultures, all religions pretty much in the country, socioeconomically diverse. It means no single solution works for everyone. No cookie cutter solution works. So you need to think about diversity and scale at the same time. This is 2009 when the Aadhaar project began. India had less than 20% of the people who had bank account. So this is when smartphones were already launched, and India simply could not achieve financial inclusion. We were trailing behind quite a lot, very bad. And at the same time, we were also very welfare state. We give a lot of money to people as social benefits. And during 2009, we were giving $50 billion every year to people. But imagine giving people, sorry, right there? Okay, thank you. Imagine giving money to people who have no identity or no bank account. So what's going to happen is the money doesn't reach the people. Lots of leakage, and this was haunting us, right? And this is 10 years later, and I want us to fast forward to 2020. This is a 2020 report from Bureau of International Settlements that studied India's financial inclusion drive. And the study shows that India would have taken 5 decades to get to 80% of the bank account. 5 decades. If we normally did stuff, regular pace. But India really took less than a decade, frankly, 6.5 years. So India gave 1 billion people identity in 5.5 years, 1 billion bank accounts in 6.5 years. At the same time, of course, 1 billion phone connections and now 800 million internet connections. So all this happened at the same time. And this is very important to understand. This is what's called exponential change and not linear, because we cannot wait for decades to change the underlying structures. So how do we create exponential transformation in the country? That was the real key. And that brings to the topic of digital public infrastructure. And during the same time, during the same 10 years, India also laid our G2P infrastructure. G2P infrastructure to 860 million people today. India can receive money instantly with almost no cost. So this is a rail, money rail India built. It was not purpose-built rail. It was a generic rail to move money. And G2P was one of the use cases. Salary payments and many other use cases can actually happen. So, I'm sorry. Think like infrastructure. My throat is really bad, okay? And the best part, entire India stack, identity project, payment project, credentialing project, and data exchange project, all put together, India spent around $2 billion in the last 12 years. India only spent $2 billion in the last 12 years. And the savings just from G2P is $27 billion. So the ROI, return on investment, if you think infrastructure, not think mobile app, not think solution, think like rails, think like internet. If you think that and allow ecosystem to use it, you get great benefit. And that's the real story of digital public infrastructure. It's quite the way you think about highways, quite the way you think about railroads, quite the way you think about internet, quite the way you think about GPS, think about GSM network over which we can make phone calls. They're all infrastructure thinking. They're not solution thinking. So if you think solution, you end up creating silos of vertical integrated solutions again and again and again. But if you think horizontal, if you think infrastructure, many, many solutions can be built very, very rapidly on top of it. Not just by the government, even by the private players. And that brings inclusion and innovation together, right? That's a good balance. And we started with identity. We covered that topic. I don't need to talk about it. But just to reiterate, we don't do face recognition. I mean, just a nuance. We do face authentication. It's 1:1. So not a face search, but I know that's what he meant anyway, Professor meant. Very, very heavily used every day. But the real value is to the exchequer. That's a real value. Savings from the identity. People could open bank account. We could not have opened 1 billion bank account, 800, 900 million bank accounts without identity and eKYC. So when eKYC was offered as a building block to the rest of the country, the banking sector, telecom sector embraced it and leveraged it to open millions of accounts paperless, which reduced their cost of acquisition, cost of compliance, cost of verification, all came down. And that's a good thing. When cost comes down, inclusion happens. It's a very important learning that we went through. This is important. Do not think about identity merely as a database of collecting lots of data. the two services that ought to happen, and we heard from Nigeria, we heard from Ethiopia, everyone is doing this now, pretty much the standard thing to do, is authentication, offline, online, mobile, non-mobile, and eKYC service. Because that opens up innovation on top of identity. And we come across many countries saying, we already have a paper identity system. What can we do? You don't have to rewrite and start from scratch. You can create a thin digital layer on top of your physical identity. Don't try to rebuild the whole thing. You don't need to rebuild the whole thing. Create digital identity layer on top of it. So, and you can create digital signature layers on top of it, and so on. And this is what we subsequently built, and that is unified payment interface. We launched this in 2016, and last month we did 8.9 billion transactions on it, so in 6 years. So this is again because we did not build a mobile app to send money. We did not build a mobile app. We built a rail, digital rail, driven by standard specification to move money from one account to another account instantly. No user interface, no apps, no nothing, just the rail. But we encourage the ecosystem to build on top of it. And we have companies who completely was born in the UPI era. They didn't exist before. Companies who started to ride the wave and actually rode that UPI momentum and actually became now $10 billion companies and so on, startup companies, right? It's a huge volume. Because again, this comes to this, government cannot solve everything. Government cannot go stick QR codes in every shop. Government cannot do entire vertical integration of the whole solutioning. Government, in India, government opened up interoperability, mandated interoperability, and enabled innovation APIs, application programming interface, on top of the entire ecosystem built. And this is very key. That's essence of DPI thinking. Otherwise, you are digitizing, and it is costly to try digitizing all by yourself. Thinking DPIs don't need any cost. UPI was literally a few $1 million for whole India. Few $1 million, that's all India spent on UPI. So no capex, very little. And then we also opened up data, which is a very important layer. Because when you digitize the country, the result of digitization is enormous creation of digital footprints and digital data. And that data neither can be locked into the government silos, nor can be monopolized by private entities. So India took a stance that data must be given back to the people, what we call data democracy. If it's my invoices, my bill payments, my payment information, we can make sure I get my copy of the data. And the good thing about that, we started with something called credentialing architecture. And I know Ethiopia and few of the other people are actually implementing as we speak. This is not just identity as credential. Identity is just the beginning. We have academic credential. We have trade licenses. We have property records. We have marriage certificate. We have many, many such documents that today we issue on paper. And the cost of trust, cost of verification of that paper is really high. When the cost is high, innovation stagnates. So it is important as government, we unblock that friction. And that is done through what's called verifiable credentials. It's a global standard. You can all adopt it. It's quite easy to adopt. And you can still provide a physical copy because people with no phones still need to carry, and we saw that in much of the examples, they can carry a printed. Benin, for example, talked about printed copy with QR code. So you don't have to prohibit printing, but make it natively, digitally verifiable. It dramatically reduces the cost of trust in the society. And that's very, very key. And we are doing that. And this one We spent, again, $6 million in the last 12 years, and we have 160 million people using it. 6 billion documents already. Very little cost. It doesn't cost anything at all. It's a way of thinking. So we can actually, you all encourage you to do it. It's all open standard based, okay? So there's no software needed. And if you have certificates, put a QR code. Think about it. That's all you need to do. So don't change any habits. People like their printed certificate. They like their academic certificate to be in photo frame. Don't stop it. But put a QR code, digitally signed QR code. That allows verifiability built in. That's what it happens. Authenticity to be verified. And then, of course, we are opening up the entire data. And our financial data network is now live. We have about 1.1 billion bank accounts connected. Bank, mutual fund, insurance data. What does it do? And the only one takeaway from this, only one. India did our data sharing infrastructure without a central switch or central middleware or a central database. That means we have no centralized database, switch or middleware that is moving data, because that brings surveillance risk and security risk. It brings cyber security risk. So India did a completely what's called a peer-to-peer, decentralized data sharing architecture, and is very much worth looking at it when you're looking at it in 2023. You don't want to go down to a centralized architecture, because data centralization is pretty obviously bad idea. Okay? And the beauty of DPI thinking is this. This is what's happening. India is starved of lending. Indian most small enterprises, and don't get any loan from the formal banking system. It is not because banks don't want to give them lending. It's because the cost of acquiring them, cost of verifying them, cost of doing their credit check, credit worthiness check, and cost of doing all that thing is simply not viable to actually ask. If they ask for 100,000 rupees for 10% interest rate, my cost is much more than what I can charge as interest rate. So it's a very simple economics. Simple economics. Cost of provisioning dramatically creates exclusion. So reduce the cost of the whole ecosystem. That's all you need to think about. And the idea of DPI is that you can combine block number 1, identity, digital signature, payment for repayment, and other data, all these independent blocks, not done by the same authority. They're all done by different authorities. But they're all offered as an application programming interface to the ecosystem. So as a lender, now I can combine, like a Lego block, I can combine identity API, payment API, and other API to create a paperless, low-cost lending offer. First time in India's history, we are able to give a $2 loan. $2. Instantly. And that creates access to capital. Without access to capital, your businesses come to a grinding halt. And it's important that we, again, as government and regulators, you unblock the friction. Don't try solving. Unblock the friction so that others can solve. And that's where the essence of thinking of DPI. This is the old way of thinking. Government will do everything. And it's a bad idea. India tried it, failed it miserably. And we are now, don't want to go back to that time, where government has to do everything. Government only runs buses, government only runs rails, government only runs telecom. We got away from that, okay, thankfully. But US and other developed nations went to the other extreme. They let the private companies take over innovation post-internet era, creating walled gardens, lack of interoperability, fragmentation, and data silos. And that's not good. That's not a good idea. So how do you balance that? That's a real DPI thinking. How can you, as enablers, think about interoperability specification, minimum rails that you can do, and you can say, no, I'm not negotiating on interoperability, but innovation is left to you. You go create innovation. And it was key for India. Remember the diversity argument. For our diversity and scale, one app, one portal, one way to think about it will not work. So you need many, many, many solutions to create. And that also creates competitive innovation, competitive marketplace. That's a very good thing for sustained economic growth. And that's what we are doing with DPI. And best part about that, India managed to do is India formalized our economy so fast in the last 10 years that no more than 50, 60 million people could have access traditionally into the formal system. Formal banking, formal mutual fund industry, formal insurance system, formal lending, all that thing. They were all outside the system, completely in the dark. India formalized them and gave them bank account, gave them mutual fund access because cost reduced. When cost reduced, everybody could come in. When they came in, the best part is India's tax collection. India's tax collection grew faster than the GDP. That's a good side effect to have. Really good side effect to have. Not only you are enabling the people with access, you are enabling people with access to what we all have access to, formal system. But at the same time, formalization creates a good way to actually bring better tax compliance and better earning for the government. And that's a good thing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pramod.
That was good.
Absolutely, thank you. Please, actually, I'd like you to have a seat in case somebody reacts to you, as I want to bring in two experts, very well known, who will join us on the stage, and I will ask them a couple of questions to react to what they've heard. The first is Christine Schultz-Kawanga, who is the head of digital governance component for GIZ, Digital Transformation Center Kenya, and head of digital government component IDGC. Hello. Pleasure. Thank you. Please have a seat. Jonathan Marskell, Senior Program Officer from ID4D from the World Bank, and a longtime friend of mine. Thank you, Jonathan. Please have a seat. Actually, I want to start with Kristen. You are from GIZ, but you also wear another hat. You're involved with another multi-stakeholder initiative, which is called GovStack. Can you explain to us what GovStack is, and how does it differ from the India Stack? Mike?
One work? This one works. I found one. Plenty of microphones here. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be on this panel, especially after this really impressive presentation. And yes, thanks for introducing me. And yes, indeed, I do wear basically 2 or maybe 3 hats. So I'm working for GIZ here in Kenya. I'm part of the Digital Transformation Center, which sits here in Nairobi. And I'm the head of the digital government component there, but I'm also heading a regional project, a regional initiative under the Horn of Africa initiative, also on digital government, where we work with Kenya, Djibouti, and Somalia. What's unifying in all of those activities or heads is that we work with the GovStack approach. And I think it's actually very nice, continuing from this presentation, what GovStack is or what GovStack does. It's basically a community. So GovStack is a multi-stakeholder initiative that was founded in 2020 and is led by the governments of Germany and Estonia, together with GIZ, ITU, and DIAL. And what it does, it's essentially creating a global community aiming at breaking down the barriers to build sustainable DPIs and assist governments specifically in creating their human-centered digital services. So it was really formed to accelerate a country's ability to digitally transform safely and sustainably. And this is the idea, so it really tries to provide this community and lever on what is there and connect actually dots that we have existing, as we just saw already as another example. So this is in a nutshell what GovStack does.
Do you create standards for modular definitions? Explain if that's the case.
Yes, so what we do is we don't provide software, we provide specifications. So we basically provide the first ever global toolbox, so to say, for governments to use And one part of the toolbox is GovStack. And GovStack is basically specifications that really enables governments to make their own decisions. It provides specifications for building blocks. We've heard now the examples how we can, stack building blocks like Legos on top of each other. And it enables them to really check whether their individual stack is secure, scalable, and optimized for innovation, essentially built to last. We also enable partners to build their own set of software requirements and create and expand on those requirements to make them interoperable for their own country, but ideally even for the wider community. So this is really what we're trying to provide with the so-called building blocks.
Okay, great. We'll come back to that in a second. Jonathan, you are in the middle of the development agenda, and I'd like to know, why do DPIs make sense from a development point of view? Mike, please. Why do they make sense from a developmental point of view?
Okay, it is working?
Yes.
Yes, it is. Okay. First, also, since the first time the World Bank has spoken, I want to thank the government of Kenya for the great hospitality, but also to thank you, Joseph, for the wonderful job that you've done putting this together. More than 1,800 people is an extraordinary accomplishment. Yes, I think a round of applause.
Thank you.
So why is DPI important? I mean, Pramod talked about a lot of the impact that we've seen. Pramod has talked about...
Mike?
Third time lucky. Good. Okay, so Pramod presented earlier all the impact that we've seen in India in terms of financial inclusion, social protection delivery, G2P payments, etc. But why we see this as having great potential in countries, for example, in Africa, in other parts of South Asia, East Asia, etc., is this reusability of it, right? This idea is that if you build an ID layer, a data exchange layer, a payments layer, then everything else can be done more easily on top. If there is another pandemic, hopefully not, we'll be much more easily able to respond to that with cash payments more quickly, to be able to manage the public health risks, to keep hospitals, schools, commerce, government offices running, if we have these building blocks in place. The other aspect, though, is the innovation that it enables. If a small, medium enterprise can get away with not having to reinvent the identity layer, the payments layer, etc., and to focus on the innovation, to focus on the entrepreneurship angle, to focus on their products and services, then they can do much more amazing things, right? So we see this as something about resilience, about inclusion, and about digital economy growth.
So you're saying by providing the common reusable pieces, we put our energy elsewhere, which is the innovation. Why repeat the wheel every time?
Exactly, where it matters.
Where it matters, exactly. Great. So, and this is a question for both of you. I can start with Kristen, and then you can come back. This one, I want you to answer it from the hat of GIZ. What are you seeing in terms of demand from countries, specifically in Africa, but also in other areas? The World Bank is constantly solicited, GIZ is constantly solicited. What is the demand side?
I think I would name two things. I think the demand side, working with the governments in different countries, on the one side is the community. I think apart from the technical innovations and the solutions that can be there, there's a big thirst in having actually a peer group and a community of equals that can exchange and share their knowledge and their experiences in their digital transformation. I think this is actually very powerful, and we all know it from ourselves. We learn much better from equals and peers than from experts that have an expertise that might be actually very far away from us. And I'm just coming from last week, we had a regional technical committee in Djibouti bringing the 3 countries under the Horn of Africa together, and it was really hard to get them out of this room and stop talking, because this thirst for exchanging and learning and creating bonds and saying like, hey, you know, can you share this? Can we look at your policy here? Can we have more expertise? How you've come to this point was really huge. So I think the community part and creating communities of practice of countries who have done an equal transition or in a similar way actually approaching digital transformation can be very powerful. I think the second point, the second demand is really a little bit more on the technicality, and I would maybe try to describe it something like owning actually their infrastructure, like having the capacities to really make decisions on their own and being in the driving seat of knowing where is this decision going to take us 3 years, 5 years down the line, like what are really the costs and how can we actually manage the solutions ourselves and scale them ourselves without being constantly dependent on, you know, other people, external experts coming in. So really having this in-house capacity to work with building blocks, to actually then come up with a list of specifications and see those are the options. There's not just one big option to implement, you know, system A, but there's a whole list and we can make the choice that fits us best. So I think maybe those would be two. I think there are plenty more, but maybe I would leave it at naming those two demands that I observe.
Very nice. Jonathan, take it from there.
So last year at the UN General Assembly, the World Bank, Digital Public Goods Alliance, UNDP, the Gates Foundation, several other organizations organized an event at head of state level. And quite a large number of African countries were represented by presidents, prime ministers, ministers of ICT, many of the countries here today. And at that event, it was a focus on DPI. Several commitments were made in terms of moving forward with building DPI. We now see a large number of countries, a growing number of countries joining this coalition to the extent that at the end of this year, towards the end of this year, there will be a head of state level conference, probably around the UN in New York, where some of those commitments will be firmed up. In terms of the numbers of countries, we're looking at 50 countries in 5 years, specifically 10 countries this year. But more generally about when you speak digital identity, digital payments, data sharing, pretty much every country is building that. And most of them are starting to connect these dots. When I talk about from the World Bank's experience on identity alone, we're supporting 47 countries with financing. The majority are in Africa. I'm very happy that many of them have been presenting and they've done an extraordinary job over the last few years. Nigeria, certainly, Ethiopia, Benin, who just presented, amongst others. So we see a lot of interest. Then also what's important to note is at the level of the G20, and I know there's not many G20 members here, there's a couple, but nonetheless, there is a growing movement to make this a global priority on the political agenda because it's so important to development and for all the reasons I mentioned earlier. Now, why are we seeing this growth? First, the COVID experience. The countries that had elements of DPI in place, as I mentioned earlier, they were better able to respond. Second is growing demand from the private sector, from the youth, particularly in Africa. It's very dynamic. As more people get online, as more opportunities emerge in the digital economy, they're asking their government, we need DPI, we need these platforms that we can build on top of. And third is the inclusion aspect. There's still a lot of people who are being left behind from many programs that we're implementing. Thank you.
So there is a silver lining to COVID then? Okay. Actually, we gave Pramod a little bit of time to relax after this wonderful speech. I would like to take questions from the audience to Pramod first. If anybody would like to ask a question, please raise your hand so we can recognize you and get you a microphone. Okay? Yes, in the front. In the front. Microphone, please. Please state your name and your country, your organization, and your question in as precise as you can.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Usman El-Nafati from Nimsy, Nigeria. My question is to Dr. Varma. One of the issues you said help in India is decentralization. But when you decentralize, then you involve many people and many companies and so on. Now, how do you guarantee issue of security of data and protection from interference and hacking and all these things? Thank you.
Please.
Is this on? No. Okay, it's on. Okay. Yeah, thank you for asking that question. It's a very common question we receive. So, first of all, think about this. Today, your data is already in many federated systems. They're not centralized, right? You go to a bank, the bank has your data. You go to a investment people have some data. You are working in a company, your company has employee-employer data. And you might be going to a hospital, then you have hospital data. They are not centralized. They are already there in those respective systems. So the question we were asking is that why should we bring all that data, put it into another system? And who will trust that system, right? And also becomes very much a honeypot, what's called a honeypot for cyber attacks, because now you have a all-knowing system that is collecting all the data. So we shifted our argument saying, let the data remain where the event occurred, where the data happened. It's already there, and they have a compliance, hospital data compliance, financial data compliance. They all have regulatory compliance and requirements already there. But can we create a secure protocol, technology protocol, that allows individuals to connect and pull that data in real time in end-to-end encrypted fashion? So the protocol embeds the security elements you are asking for. How do you know the counterparty is a hospital? How do you know where you are exchanging? So we have signatures, signature exchange, we have encryption, end-to-end encryption, many, many details of that matter, but embedded in the protocol. What does it mean? That means we are not creating a mega system to collect all this data. Instead, we are saying data in any society remains in federal structure. And let that remain, let that be protected. But when I need it, I can use the secure protocol to connect, pull, access, and share using my consent. So it's a technology detail, and I can't go into everything, but happy to have separate sessions for Nigeria. You are our friends, so we'll always do sessions for you.
Wonderful, thank you. Actually, I want to move on back to Jonathan. And Jonathan, I'd like you to share with us from your vast experience sort of a reality check in terms of the capacity and the level of readiness that a country has to have before it embarks into developing DPIs. I mean, are African countries ready?
Okay, so the short answer is yes. What Ethiopia presented earlier is home developed. A lot of what Benin has done is home developed.
Wonderful.
What Nigeria developed, as Uche said, it's developed by Nigerians for Nigeria. So the capacity is certainly there. What gets in the way often is politics, archaic laws, and other non-capacity related issues. Of course, there is a need to continue to build capacity, but I don't think that's an excuse anymore. In fact, I've been amazed at all the innovations that we've seen from the countries over the last 2 days. But at the same time, the legal frameworks, as I mentioned earlier, they do need to be updated. And unfortunately, this takes a long time. And another challenge that we see is that it requires different parts of the government to work together. As Pramod shared earlier, the ID is done by UIDAI, the payments is done by NPCI, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't have to be in the same institution, but it's often difficult to get different parts of the government to work together, and that is why you need that support at the head of state level.
But it's happening because of the architecture of interoperability. You embraced a whole of government through an interoperability protocol. They don't have to be in the same room working on the same code.
Correct.
And
Correct.
So that's the key.
The technical part is actually the easiest part to solve.
Exactly. It has to be... yeah, please
There's
add.
one point I want to add. And again, when you think about infrastructure thinking, you tend to build less. You don't tend to build more.
Yeah.
So actually capacity is the other way around. If you want to build a whole system, you need a lot more capacity, a lot more vendor negotiation, a lot more traps, procurement traps you fall into. But doing less actually is better.
And if I can just add, sorry, Joseph, the idea of DPI is actually that you build interoperability by design from the start.
Exactly.
Right? It is much harder to retroactively make a system interoperable.
Exactly. I was very encouraged yesterday in the panel with the Cabinet Secretary Awalo and Ambassador, the PS of the Minister of Interior, Bitok, about how harmonious they were actually working together with well-defined scope of interventions and understanding that it is happening at the interoperability level with the data. One is providing infrastructure, the other is providing data, but they're all using the same sort of standards so that, you know, it's like you're building a bridge from one side, a bridge from the other. You hope when they meet, they're not going to be, they're going to align, and that's what's going to happen. Anybody wants to ask a quick question, raise your hand. Otherwise, we have some more things. I want to go to Kristen. Do I see somebody? Please stand, stand up and present yourself.
My name is Lina Chacha from Upanzi Research Network. We are based in Rwanda. And my question goes to Dr. Varma. Earlier on, you presented statistics of how you saw a growth in adoption of smartphones. What I want to know, is there any deliberate policies or any other factors that drove this, or was it just organic due to the ease of the ecosystem?
Yeah, there are two parts. Policy interventions happened at multiple levels. One is telecom policy. Our telecom regulator is quite strong and did a great job bringing new players into the market other than incumbents, because incumbents tend to innovate slower and innovators are always challenging, they're hungrier. So I think bringing a new entity into the system completely changed the game. And, you know, and it put pressure on everybody else. So that's why India went from within 6 months to a year, India was Indians per capita, we were consuming 1 GB a month. And within a year, we were consuming 1 GB a day, everyone, because the data cost plummeted. So that's one. Second, devices. So we encourage many device and device assembly and manufacturing in the country. We had a lot of support for smartphone assembly and manufacturing. Not the core components that mostly imported, but the assembly. And that also created quite a low-cost access to mostly Android. India is full of Android phones. So, which is what our UID authority was also saying. That also gave a challenge because we have to comply with so many different types of phone. It's tricky, but you know, hey, it gave options, choice to people. So it's good. They were the big one, manufacturing and telecom policy, I think that created. And of course, aspiration. India, by the way, most of Indians, 75% of Indians are less than 35 years old.
Yeah,
we are a very young country. So very digitally aspirational young population.
Similar to Africa. So
Africa is
excellent.
Ready for blooming. Yeah.
Very good insight. Kristen, I wanted to understand from your perspective, what are the potential risks and pitfalls to a country jumping into the development of DPIs?
Good question. I think the risks are not fully embracing what it takes to own it, that there is obviously some investment that needs to come in terms of resources, personnel, structures that have to be created, and maybe that ties a little bit back also to the discussion about the challenges in general, that while of course we have the sources and we have building blocks that technically we can plug and play, the structure first needs to be set up. And I think there, it's not just, you know, in Africa and India, it's really worldwide. We tend to work in silos and we tend to think in our organizational or departmental structure, and breaking this up, I guess, is continuous work and needs people continuously working on it. So I think the risk is really seeing this as a dynamic process that needs to be re-evaluated, where structures need to be re-evaluated, where we need to re-look at policies, you know, that we came up with. We need to re-look at interoperability frameworks to keep actually on the same track and moving forward. So it's not a solution that you can, you know, establish once and then it's done and then you have your DPIs and you move on. So it's something you really need to invest working on, and you need to create the community. You need to create the community in your own country, but also obviously globally. And I think this is maybe on the other side another advantage or another potential that we can really use with this approach, and that we really try to accelerate also under the GovStack initiative, is using the this in-house capacity that every country has. So while we have obviously countries that are far ahead and where we can learn a lot and where we can plug solutions under GovStack, we have actually done it in Djibouti, a building block that came from India. I think another focus can also be how can we further support the local ecosystems. And I guess for me, being based here in Kenya, seeing this ecosystem on a daily basis, you see this really great potential. And I think one of the points under the GovStack initiative is really trying to see how we can involve the local startups really from a very small scale to make them part of the system, to make them part of contributing solutions that fit the requirements that we have under the building blocks, that fit the minimum standards for safety, for data protection, and what so on. But I think this is also another point that we have to look into in order to keep this dynamic, momentum, to also really include the local ecosystem, because there's a huge potential that lies in a lot of countries still to be explored.
Excellent, thank you. I think you want to say something.
Yes, so we identify 4 risks. One is inclusion, exclusion, and that exclusion was already talked about in the previous session. I won't go into that again. Personal data protection, both the legal frameworks, but also building this into the design of systems, in other words, privacy by design. Third is vendor lock-in, which there's many ways to address that. Fourth, and I want to emphasize this one, is cybersecurity. The reason I want to emphasize this, Joseph, is my ask to ID4Africa is next year to have a big emphasis on cybersecurity, because we've heard it a few times over the course of the last 2 days, and I think it's a very important agenda for not just Africa, but developing countries around the world, because the risks are very high now and growing exponentially with generative AI, etc.
Exactly. Actually, thank you for making that point. I want to tap into Pramod's brain for 1 minute and explain to me and to the audience how important is PKI is in the DPI journey.
PKI is, we have actually shamelessly used PKI in all our DPIs. These keywords are tricky, okay? But PKI brings digital trust between the two systems. So this is why when you type HTTPS, the S part of HTTPS is the key, because that creates transport layer security and endpoint security authentication. It is useful for digital signature. Yesterday we were in one of the country discussion. Nobody uses digital signature because traditionally digital signature was issued in carry dongle, and you assume you have to plug it into a laptop. Who has laptops? Nobody has laptops. So it's a question of very few people used it. So it was very key to create an open API for digital signature. It was again a complete PKI play, and for allowing, but leveraged identity authentication for that, right? So there we are using it. Unified payment interface and all our subsequent work, healthcare and data sharing, every data packet that is going across the wire is both digitally signed and encrypted. Digital signature allows non-tamperability and verification of authenticity, whereas encryption ensures theft, middleman, theft from the middleman who is snooping in. So PKI, if you are not investing in PKI, you are in serious trouble. And I'll say one more thing. Actually, the risk question, according to me, not doing DPI is the biggest risk.
Right.
Because you will run out of digitization money. And again and again and again capturing data, system, machines, the whole thing, or every department, every state, again and again. It's a huge risk for the country not thinking DPI.
So I want to share with you a dream, or perhaps a nightmare I had a week ago. Actually, I had a dream that someone invented quantum computers to the point that they cracked the PKI encryption. So help me make sure that this is not going to be a nightmare, because if somebody cracks PKI with quantum computing, everything we're talking about today is going to go down the tube, and it's going to be bigger than the COVID pandemic crisis. Explain to the audience.
I'm a computer scientist. I can actually tell you, every time we reinvent new computing architecture, we also upgrade our security architecture. Encryption we'll get quantum encryption. Right. So already people are working on quantum encryption and decryption.
But the infrastructure is not there for that.
No, but I think what will happen is that No way. No, private companies, think about it.
Yeah.
If you're running a large IBM or machine, you cannot release a quantum computer into a common application space, what's called a cloud space. Private, careful application, military and all can be used, but you can't bring it to the market unless you solve data encryption problem, because you're going to say, I'm going to introduce a new computer that breaks everything I did in the last 10 years. Right?
Unless you're nefarious, unless you are evil and you want to cause...
No, but companies are not evil, so I think people are evil.
This is an interesting statement. Companies are not evil.
Yeah, I think it's a very bad setup to do, because I think most people are actually genuinely good. And there are evil people, evil faces, evil part, everything going on. But, I mean, we should assume that if we are doing global changes, and the global changes are scrutinized by the, like AI discussion going on.
Look at what's
Society
happening.
will rise up to demand accountability.
But in the meantime, we are going to have not to be, we cannot be complacent. We have to understand that PKI may be one day breakable.
Very much. Okay, that brings the real question of DPI, and that she alluded to also, called evolvability. Today, Aadhaar, for example, or UPI, for example, we started with 1024 PKI. We are at 4K PKI, literally on the flight. Flight is going. We never landed the flight. But we are upgrading our encryption, and we are deprecating, or finishing off the older encryption mechanism on the fly, literally on the fly. We have to think about this architectural constructs of how do we continuously evolve in not a one-time activity that you can bake it in and forget. It's like your house. You build your house, you have to maintain. You build your roads, you have to maintain.
But that's why you also have to make sure you're not issuing cards which have infrastructure in them that cannot be upgraded.
Exactly.
So
I do want to make one point, though, on this very active debate here. The reality is that the governments, to keep up, to evolve on the fly, they need to do procurement.
Right.
That is very difficult to do, right? And so there is a need to think very practically about the challenges that governments and civil servants face. There's need to reforms to unlock a lot of these things that you're talking about.
Actually, unfortunately, we cannot continue this debate because we ran out of time. But I'd like to thank these gentlemen and lady for an excellent, excellent session. I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Well done. Okay, we are going to heat things up. Once again, we are going to continue with the last but not least segment, which is segment 3. And this segment is called, I want to make sure I read it correctly. It's on being open, lock-in, interoperability, and collaboration. And the way I want to do this, you may see too many chairs on the stage, and that this is going to be a big panel. I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to do it by asking people incrementally to come with me to the stage. I will start with Deborah Comparin, who's the chair of OSIA initiative from the Secure Identity Alliance. Welcome, Deborah. Thank you for being with us. I'd like to ask Ramesh Narayanan, who's the CTO for the modular open source identity platform, MOSIP. Thank you, Ramesh. Thank you for being with us. Please have a seat. Okay. So the first topic that we would like to address has to do with vendor lock-in. We spoke about this for a while. I raised it in 2018. I reiterated it. But thanks to the initiatives that are led by these two people, we now have potential solutions. So I'd like to start by asking Deborah just to explain to me what is OSIA, and then we can talk about how it solves the problem. What is OSIA?
Doesn't work.
Microphone, please. That's a hot mic.
This works?
Yes?
Okay.
Now it works.
Now it works? This one. We're going to get there? Okay.
Yes.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here, first of all. Just very quickly, what is OSIA is about. OSIA is an open standard. put it simply. I feel like we talked a lot in the earlier panel about open standards, so I don't want to repeat everything. But essentially, it's all about interoperability. It's a community-based open standard. So when I say community, it's a bit special because it's developed together by governments and private sector from the very beginning. And essentially, what we want to bring is interoperability for foundational identity systems. So we are breaking a big solution, what was known as big solution, into little pieces, and then building railways. I'm just using the same words that I've heard before. Essentially, we're building APIs, so interfaces, to connect all those building blocks so that there's choice in the market. Maybe we can get into the details of the benefit of this. But essentially, it's a community effort for interoperability as an open standard.
Okay, we'll come back to that in a second. Ramesh, the same question. What is MOSIP?
Thank you, Joseph, for having us here. It's been a wonderful event. Good evening, everyone. MOSIP is actually an open source digital public good for countries to develop their identity platforms on. It focuses on a digital native identity solution, which can be a digital public infrastructure for people who use it.
Okay. Now that we've defined what these two initiatives, they're very different. I mean, but they still address similar issues and problems. So, Deborah, how does OSIA solve the problem that was identified in 2018 and which motivated some of the work that you guys have done, which is vendor and technology lock-in?
So we bring interoperability, and we think that interoperability is really key to solve vendor lock-in. There are various reasons to this, but most of all, it's all about choice, right? So it's really giving governments the freedom to select vendors, no matter their technology or their business model, open source or proprietary, and then to pull together different building blocks, different components, different solutions from different vendors, and have actually the final product, the final solution that works. So interoperability is about this, and that's really freedom of choice in the procurement, and at the same time, we allow the private sector to continue to innovate, because we are not a solution provider, right? So we don't provide a specific, unlike the case of MOSIP, we don't provide a code or anything specific on the building block, but actually we provide these railways between the building blocks.
But that must assume that everybody agreed what the building blocks are, because if we don't have that foundational agreement, then you can't swap building blocks.
Yeah, we spent 1 year on that one, so it's a good remark and it's a good point. So in fact, this was really the beginning of the story. So as you mentioned, we started in 2019 really, when we launched the initiative to respond to a request from governments on the need for interoperability and to solve vendor locking. And we thought it was simpler in a way to build interoperability. I think I was a bit naive at the time. So we just jumped into, okay, let's just build some APIs. Let's just, be interoperable with one another. And that's when we realized that what we called a certain type of database was not understood the same way by another company, by another vendor. And so this is where we say, hang on a second, let's just go back to the fundamentals. And we literally spent a lot of time to define what those building blocks were so that it could fit the whole ecosystem, so the market. And once we have identified that, then via use cases and the help of governments, then we started to build those APIs, so the interfaces, the railways to connect all the different building blocks.
Okay, fair enough. Ramesh, how do you solve vendor and technology lock-in?
Pretty much the same way. Right, we are modular, and we are actually doing the design of our MOSIP platform using design principles, which include technology agnostic behavior, so that we can upgrade and evolve parts of it over a period of time, and also by using open standards, so that there is choice. When we offer MOSIP, we don't say you have to use MOSIP. We can say you can use parts of MOSIP that fit in, or you can replace, you can upgrade. So there is always a path, right? So we are not locking in anybody in this process. But our choice of open source goes beyond choice, but it goes to the control that we give in the hands of the user, right? If it is something that they want to run on their own, if they want to evolve on their own, we actually enable that by also making it open source, in addition to being open standards driven. So, but pretty much I agree with Deborah on the fact that choice comes in and avoidance of vendor lock-in comes in through standards being followed.
But the issue here, if I want to have choice or be able to control my own destiny, doesn't that assume that I have the capacity? Like, how many of you have gone into your computer, opened it, and looked inside and tried to make changes? At some point, you need capacity in order to be able to do that. Is that something that comes to mind as the #1 choice for governments? We go from solving vendor lock-in, are we producing a capacity problem?
Yeah, I will actually leverage the statements that Pramod previously made. Mm-hmm. It's not for the government to build everything, but I think the critical infrastructure pieces are the ones which the government actually needs to be in control of, and that's where they need capacity. Mm-hmm. The rest actually can be done by the private sector, and defining standards is a good way of setting guardrails around that, right? And the capacity should come from the industry. Even governments, when we say building government capacity, part of it is capacity within the government, part of it is the local industry that's available who are willing to support the government. And we work a lot in creating this capacity also by way of training, as well as building an ecosystem of private sector players who actually help sustain these solutions.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the OSIA adoption and the MOSIP adoption. I would like to understand the landscape of adoption in Africa and worldwide. So maybe, Deborah, I start with you.
Yes, so we started OSIA, like I mentioned, in 2019. We really launched the initiative, so we're quite young, but we are very proud on the fact that several governments already has chosen to embrace the OSIA standard. Again, we are not a solution provider, we are an open standard, so then governments will choose the OSIA path, so the interoperability path, and then they will purchase various solutions, the building blocks from the private sector. We have various implementations, so we have from in Europe, but also in Africa and South America. I don't know if you want me to mention them, but there are actually some countries here in the room also.
A couple of countries in Africa.
Yeah, so it's Guinea, DRC, Nigeria. I hope I'm not forgetting. So these are the three that comes to mind, but there are more. There is also Costa Rica, for example, or Monaco in Europe. So there are various implementations, and what we actually realized is that it's not much a matter of implementations, but also providing a certain assurance around interoperability and the fact that this implementation is truly interoperable, so based on open standard. So we actually focused a lot of our effort in the past year on a certification scheme on OSIA, but maybe we can talk about it a bit later. Yeah. But I think I just don't want to pass on this question by only talking about implementation without talking about the qualification scheme around it, because I think the two are very much linked and are very important.
Understood. We'll come back to that. Ramesh, how has the adoption of MOSIP been?
We have had plenty of interest and good adoption over the last few years, to the extent that I think we are one of the largest digital public goods which have seen good adoption. And we have in Asia, the Philippines, who have 70 million plus people who actually received IDs using the system. And we have in Africa, Morocco and Ethiopia who have gone live. And we have at least another 3 countries who are in the process of going with their national rollouts. And in all these cases, they have been able to actually source devices, biometric devices, registration kits, software SDKs, and biometric deduplication, ABS engines, all of these from potentially multiple vendors, right? There has been a lot of choice because, again, we are going with open specifications and standards. wherever standards are already existing, we are using those, and wherever standards are not there, we are working hard to put proper specifications. We have plenty of collaborations at the GovStack level. We are working with GovStack, for example, and I think that we are collaborating with OSIA folks also there, and we are creating these specifications which basically increase choice, right? And that allows procurement to be much easier, much more competitive, and this has actually been a positive for the kind of adoption. Added to that, the beauty has been that countries like Ethiopia have also built their own local team to start building some of the components. So they decide what to procure, what to build on their own. For the Fida app, for example, is something that they are building on their own, right? The pre-registration application, they took what we have from MOSIP, they customized it, and made it available. So there's a lot of choice on what to procure, what to build, the government's hand.
Now, Deborah, I just want to be specific. You mentioned OSIA as a standard. Is it a specification or is it a standard?
It's both. So it's a specification. It started as a specification, and now actually we've been working to have it recognized as an international standard. And so we have been collaborating with ITU for that. We thought it was a suitable home for this standard. And it's a lengthy process. I don't know if any of you is involved in standards, international standard, but it takes some time. And actually, we are at the end of this process, and we should have the recognition and pass OSIA as an international standard by end of August this year.
So let me understand. This is not an ISO standard. This is an ITU standard, correct? Right. So does that mean you have standardized the definition of modules for identity management?
So what we have standardized is actually all the specifications. So we have standardized the definition of the modules and also all the interfaces, so the APIs to connect those modules. And indeed, it's an ITU standard. So ITU, for those of you who are not familiar, is actually a UN agency looking at standardization. We chose that for a simple reason, that we thought that this approach to interoperability is very much based on what the telecom have done in the past. So, you know, to be blunt, there's nothing new under the sun. So it might be new to the identity ecosystem, but it has been done before. And so we actually, as vendors, we actually are quite active also on the network and telecom area, so we're familiar with those approaches. We started from there, and we actually replicated this. And so because of all those standardization are hosted in ITU, then we just went through the same path.
Okay.
But ITU and ISO have some liaison, etc. So it's possible eventually, if we think it's relevant, to also move forward with an ISO recognition, so to become an ISO standard. If this is something we would normally discuss with governments and with the advisory committee, because it also has to make sense for the whole ecosystem. So that's something that we'll see together.
Ramesh, in general, open source has become very popular in the last few years, not just for identity management. What do you attribute that popularity to? What are the advantages, in your opinion, of open source?
I think there are several advantages to open source. It allows multiple players to actually offer services around that. You get a lot of choice of services around open source solutions because there are many entrepreneurs, small and medium enterprises who can actually go in and pick up skills around these solutions and start offering themselves without having to be authorized partners or pay huge fees to become part of a large companies' network.
Has this happened already with MOSIP, and where?
Yes, so we always get surprised when somebody posts a question, we are using this for this purpose, and can you validate the architecture and the design that we are using in this particular scenario? And so it goes beyond intended usage in many cases, right? While our target is government, we have found that a lot of our components are actually picked up by small companies, startups who are actually creating innovative solutions for functional identity and so on. So that's one advantage. The second advantage is that it's possible for the adopter to build internal capacity and gain some control. And this is very critical, especially for applications that need continuity, right? National identity systems, critical infrastructure, and all, they run for decades, right? People live for decades. And so we have to have systems that can be sustained, irrespective of whether technology changes or people's skills are available or not. There needs to be some manageability to the whole thing, right? Even if a company closes up or is bought over by somebody else, corporate transactions happen, support turns expensive, inexpensive. We can't have these systems being shut off, right? So it's important to have a modicum of control, if required. I'm not saying do everything yourselves. Rely on the industry, but have a backup plan. So that is something that appeals a lot, right? You have the control.
One of the questions we get asked often at ID4Africa, for our opinion, is, are there any cost advantages to adopting an open source solution versus an open standard solution? Do you see any cost advantage?
There will be some cost advantage, but that's only to do with the limited licensing costs that are there involved with these components. Any kind of large critical infrastructure solution has many parts, right? The software licenses are just a small part of it. You still need to buy the hardware, implement these, customize it, localize it to your needs, roll out the systems, support them, and that's where actually the major elements of cost are.
Deborah, I want you to address the same issue.
Look, I look at this question from a different perspective. So for me, again, open standard and interoperability give the opportunity to implement any type of solution, be it open source, proprietary, or even a mix. So my point is, when it comes to cost and procurement, it would make sense, if I were a government, what would make sense for me would be to look in detail at how much the final solution will cost me. And so what would be nice, and what interoperability and open standard allows you to do, is actually to let all the different solutions bid, right, for the same tender. So it means that you're sure that you have interoperability, and then you're able to compare all those different answers that you might get that are totally different. So I'm not getting into the detail of open source, proprietary, mix, but my point on cost is transparency. And transparency, I think it's really allowed by asking for interoperability and then let the market answer with the best-in-class solution.
So what you're basically saying, RFPs should not say open source or open standard, they should say interoperability.
They should say interoperability via open standard, and then the solution would be, any solution that is compatible with open standard, no matter the technology behind or the business model, open source, proprietary, or a mix. That's what I'm saying. It's just transparency on that, while making sure that you're not vendor locked and you are purchasing something even from multiple vendors that is standard based. But there's just one thing that I would like to add, which is slightly linked on cost, is that sometimes there are legacy solutions in place in countries. So we have to be mindful of that. That's the reality, right? And it's not always possible to toss away everything that has been built in the past. So the cost advantage of interoperability is this as well, is being able to build on top of the existing rather than restarting. It's not always possible or even recommendable to restart.
I understand. Now, the elephant in the room is one question I'd like to ask you both, which is, are we looking at a world where we're going to be split into two? Those are in the open source camp, and those are in the other camp that's not open source, but still interoperable, but there is no interoperability across.
I hope not, otherwise I talk for nothing for all those past 20 minutes.
No, but this is where we're heading. This is where we're heading.
Yeah, sure. I mean, let's be...
be honest. This
yes,
is the elephant
let's be
in the
blunt
room.
about it. Absolutely no, I really hope not. So the whole point for me, and here I'm representing the industry and our effort and the government and the community behind it, is to rally behind interoperability, no matter which solutions are behind. So open source, open standard, or even proprietary, or even a mix of those. So even, you know, OSIA has been, today, I don't know if you follow the hackathon from OpenServias, for example. So that's an example of an open source solution, and that we demonstrated the compatibility with the OSIA, in this case, the OSIA open standard. But my point is absolutely, it should be like this. I mean, interoperability really goes beyond the business model and the technology of the building blocks.
But Ramesh, you guys don't interoperate. You're seated next to each other, but you don't interoperate.
Yeah, I'll actually like to address this. It's a very important question. And I don't think there is any divergence in objectives. I don't think there is any divergence in the approach or the thought process. But where we see any divergence, if at all, is right on what is important for interoperability, right? We can't wear the same old hat that we have been wearing all these years and say we are going to be making it interoperable in the old way. We have to bring in the infrastructure thinking and take out the solution thinking. And we need to make sure that we are building a solution with interoperability which is looking forward rather than trying to figure out interoperability of the same way as we have already done, right? We have created entire multi-billion-dollar integration industries who are happy to just integrate A to B, and then B to C, and then A to C, all
through middleware and wrappers, is that what it is?
Exactly. Interoperability is so key, so important, and without it, nothing's going to work.
Mm-hmm.
It means that it has to be affordable, it has to be cheap, it has to be simple, which means that we cannot keep repeating ourselves. Right?
Okay.
The older paradigm of working on interoperability doesn't hold good. Right? Okay. We have to make sure that we are looking at a newer paradigm of interoperability. And I think that's emerging. There's loads of work that is happening. And I think some of the OSIA specs that I've seen also embrace these new things. Right? But there is a mix of the old and the new. And once we freeze these specs, and we say governments base these procurements on these specs, right? Then it's very difficult to unfreeze these later, right? So it's very important that we'll reach a level of maturity in these specs. And I think this level of maturity is still emerging. There's a lot of conversation and a lot of effort going on. And I believe there will be eventually the right level of maturity and convergence. And once we reach that, I think then everybody would be on the same page at that point of time.
But from my perspective, even the level of data exchange, I take a module from OSIA and a module from MOSIP, they won't talk to each other. They cannot exchange data. You do publish, subscribe, you do API. I don't know how I'm going to build the architecture that's going to make seamless data flows.
I would like to actually go back again to the expectations in interoperability, right? We are assuming that systems are going to be always online. We are going to be assuming that systems are going to be always scalable, that they are going to be responding in real time. I don't think that's a reality, right? In the evolving world, and even in the evolved world, right, with everything happening digital, systems are not going to scale in this way.
Okay.
Right? So we cannot expect every department, everywhere, every solution to have an API which is 24/7 available and can scale, right, on demand. So we have to actually design for an asynchronous first world, right? If you look at the GovStack mandate, it says async first. Our thinking is also async first, right? And that is how we are actually approaching this. So that is where we are saying publish, subscribe kind of models are very important. And for interoperability, systems have to understand each other, right? And that is the data that is exchanged between these systems. That understanding comes from defining schemas, not API endpoints, right? We need to have understandable schemas. Today, APIs, HTTP APIs, REST endpoints may be the channel for sending something. Tomorrow, it may be message queues, right? So we should segregate the channel, segregate the data, and make provisions for offline and online interactions. So that's what we are working towards, right? And security. If you're going to have cybersecurity as a major theme next year, I can add to that right now. We want to make sure that every piece of information that is sent out is tamper-evident by way of digital signature and protected by way of encryption. So that is very key And it's a compromise that we will not make because we are dealing with the data of individuals, and we are responsible for making sure that we build systems which protect that.
Understand. Deborah, do you want to react?
Look, I don't want to get technical. It's the last session of the day, so but in principle, I agree. I mean, we have a published subscriber module. We have actually a sync as well. So we do consider all of that in OSIA. It's part of also the knowledge, right, from the industry for many decades on systems. And as well, we work a lot on the security aspect. And, you know, I listened earlier about PKI and post-quantum, etc. So all of this is really important, and I think that's where the industry can really make a difference, and this is where our community and working as a community can bring the best in technology and innovation.
But you don't consider Ramesh industry?
Yes. So for me, like I mentioned, I agree with Ramesh. There's a we work on APIs, on interoperability, so any solution, so including Mozip for this specific instance, but it could be anybody else seated here, with all due respect. So the point is we have to work together as a community, and including Mozip and including any other open source solution out there or proprietary solution.
Fair enough. Where I'm standing here tonight, telling the governments that are sitting here, we do have a solution or two solutions for vendor lock-in, but we do not have total interoperability between two camps. It may be coming, it may be happening, but that's why I'm going to call a third person on the stage to try to help us guide the government thinking to say what choices, what reflections you have to take into consideration when you are trying to adopt a strategy, whether you go an open source or whether you go non-open source, OSIA-based or otherwise. Shaheen Hamila is an e-government senior advisor from UNDP. And Shaheen and UNDP, you accompany countries in their reflections, in their procurement, in their choice of architectures. So Shaheen, please come to the stage, take a seat, and help us understand wear the hat of the governments and help us understand what governments should take into consideration in taking this critical decision. There is no right or wrong answer. There is just choice, consequence. So help us through it.
Thank you, Joseph. We, at UNDP, usually when we start a project in CRVS, in the CRVS space, we like to follow the proper cycle of procurement, which is part of a bigger project, which I'm not going to necessarily go into all the details. But when it goes to the procurement and acquisition of software, we basically have, usually we start with the definition of the problem. We identify the specific case, the specific needs of the country. Some countries are starting from zero. Some others have legacy systems that need to be integrated and interoperate. Then, depending on various factors, there needs to be a choice of making or buying a system. So when buying, and here I'll go to the open source point, buying can be open source. Open source doesn't mean non-commercial. Open source actually can be a business model like any other, where you would have a, for example, an open source tier with other dependencies around it. And it's important in this case to ensure there's some competition in the way we buy these systems, whether open source or otherwise. We should not allow, for example, open source to be a way to bias the market into those who only interoperate with that open source solution. So there are two very important principles in procurement, which are basically one which we touched upon a lot is no vendor lock-in. Another one is value for money. So when we consider the cost of ownership, for example, of a whole solution, it doesn't start with the cost of entry, the cost of acquisition, which with open source, as we know, the license and entry point is zero, but it doesn't mean that the cost after that is zero. It could be actually very high. So we need to take into consideration the expertise that's present in the country, the integration needs. I mentioned the legacy systems, and other various factors here I'm not going to extend upon. When it comes to making a solution, one important point, obviously, we need to make a difference between an open source stack and an open source end product. We're in the compliance market, meaning that no two CRVS systems would be the same. There's a need for regulatory compliance and customization, therefore, of any system. So there will be development in any case. And I would say, rather than saying open source, no open source, it's important to have access to source code to ensure control. Under escrow, for example, for proprietary software. And have the technical skills, or at least the services that ensure later on the maintenance and evolution of that system.
So basically what you're saying in Shakespearean terms, to open source or not to open source is not the question.
That is correct, Joseph. It really is a decision that requires various areas of expertise. And open source or not is really not the question. It's a standard clause. For example, when we do at UNDP, when we do tenders, one of the standard clauses that we have is access to source code, as I was mentioning. So we do actually demand that when possible, we use open source. But if we're coming from an existing tech stack or platform by an existing vendor, we do not necessarily demand that they put their source code in public. As a matter of fact, many governments do not want their platforms to be built in open source because they want, for security reasons maybe, or various other reasons. But the idea is, yes, access to source code is a key.
Now, can we live in a world where we could develop procurement in such a way that the government does not dictate open source or not open source? It basically dictates other characteristics, and then ultimately you can demonstrate through different choices that we achieve what you're asking for. What I've been seeing in the recent past is that immediately the procurement, somebody tips off, says it has to be open source, or somebody says no, it has to be open standards, and therefore we're not creating choices and options for the procurement process. We want to be in a world where you have 10 vendors, some open, some not open, but all comply with your requirements. So how do we get there? How do we allow these two universes to coexist?
I would say generally when we go for the acquisition of software, whether we buy or make, as I mentioned earlier, we need to take into consider the specific of the case. But in general, we do need to take into account the economic and strategic forces behind that, the maintenance and the operation of that system. So I was mentioning that there were many ways to create vendor locks, for example, that could be through, it could be an open source system, but that's using so many complicated technologies that it can only be maintained by those who created it.
Right.
I would say as a procurement unit, for example, you have to take into account these forces as opposed to the end product. The end product itself, the way to build it, must remain the responsibility of the provider or the team who makes it, if it's an internal team. What you do need is to focus on your business needs, meaning your workflows, your regulatory rules, your operational conditions, your institutional architecture, et cetera, and many other important factors in shaping your final CRVS solution.
Great. So actually, I want to enrich this conversation by bringing in the government, bringing in a couple of representatives from the government who can give us sort of their own view of what they went through when they decided to select a pathway for their solution. I'd like to ask Hadija Ali Dagabana, who is the Director of Legal, Regulatory and Compliance Services and the Commission Secretary from Nimsy, and the ID4Africa Deputy Ambassador in Nigeria, to the stage, as well as I'd like to call on Mikala Make, who's the Director and Chief Operating Officer, Directorate of Science and Technology, DSTI, Sierra Leone, and board member from the DPGA, Digital Public Goods Alliance. So Hadija, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Dr.
Mikala, thank you for being with us. So please provide us with your perspective on how you had to how you deal with the question of what strategic and architectural choices you make when your institutions choose a solution. Please, microphone. Yes, it's hot.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Atik. Nigerian case is a very peculiar one. We've had different ID schemes before the National Identity Management System. So we really had a lot of experience on vendor lock-in in the previous projects. So it was a calculative and a strategic decision taken by government as far back as 2005, 2006, when the policy was put in place to have a national identity management system. And the key thing that the government was looking for is to, to take care of the disparate databases that were existing in the country then, that are still existing, and to make sure that the systems talk to each other. And in that vein, in the design of the National Identity Management System, a decision was taken to break up the whole system, to make sure that it's interoperate with each component of the system. And government wanted to ensure and maintain its sovereignty, and as such decided to have a control of the back-end systems that have the database, while the front-end component of the system was made open to the private sector and other government participants. So taking that decision, the key thing in getting the database is to ensure that we have a trusted system that has been tried and trusted and in place, and to make sure that a system that will assure us of security of the database. Because of that, we went for a proprietary solution. But while doing that, we made sure that in our contractor engagements, legal engagement with these proprietary service providers, we make sure that we have clauses in our agreements with them that will ensure that we can use and reuse our data irrespective of continuous usage of that infrastructure. Because the experience we had before, we had a database that we could not reuse the data. So we had to start all over afresh. So coming from that background, we had to make sure that in our legal documentation, we tighten and express our desires and make sure that our service providers also do that. That's where we came from.
So basically, solving the vendor lock-in problem could be a matter of a contractual framework. I mean, it doesn't have to be necessarily in the form of a non-proprietary solution. So proprietary solutions could work for you. You did not want to, you had the expediency to want to launch a system. Do you use modules that are OSIA compliant, or where are you in that regard?
Well, for now, all the modules we use have to be on OSIA compliance. We do use open system in our verification service, but it has to be OSIA compliance because we're on the advisory board. My DG is the chairman of the advisory board, and I serve as the deputy chair. So in all our interaction, we have to make sure, proprietary and open systems,
Okay, thank you. Mikala, your country was a founding member of the Digital Public Goods Alliance, which really advocates for open source software. Explain to us your perspective and your country's perspective and your motivation for actually being on the board of the DPGA.
Okay, thank you very much. Before Sierra Leone actually became a member of...
Microphone. Yeah, speak louder, please.
Before Sierra Leone actually became a member of the Digital Public Goods Alliance, we never had any policies, guidelines, or legal framework that would provide or dictate how and when we use open source or open standard applications. So our first interface with open standards really it was circumstantial, and that was driven by the Ebola many, many years ago. Of course, we know the devastation that came with, and we had quite a number of health workers, frontline workers who were day in, day out in the field, and they needed to receive remuneration. Most of these workers, however, were non-bankable. They didn't have bank accounts, but at the same time, so we had situations where physical cash had to be taken in vans to these locations, in very difficult terrains to make sure that they had access to funds. So that is when we engaged one of our development partners, the UNDP, and then we decided to test the Open G2P to see how bulk transfers can be made to frontline workers. And given the successes that came out of that, the fact that it actually got rid of strikes that were happening, in the midst of such a pandemic, we realized that there was need for us to be tapping into these solutions. Granted, as a nation, we did not have all the capacity internally, so we worked with those who had the expertise and the capacity. But so this also informed the need for us to be members of an alliance or an association from which we can benefit, immensely. So, as you mentioned, we're co-founders of the Digital Public Good Alliance. That really defines the standards of how low and middle income companies could actually ensure we attain our sustainable development goals by firstly trying to see how we can be able to discover and also invest in digital public goods that could be the driving force or the vehicles by which we achieve our national and global objectives. So at the Alliance, we now have an opportunity to know what it means to have specifications and standards by which we can make not only national choices, but also support other member states and other organizations to make global decisions as to the use of open source or open source tools in our solutions as we continue to build.
But your government has not adopted a generic policy which basically says that everything we procure must be open source. Have you done that?
No, we haven't. But however, the standards have really been a driving force for us. So for instance, we continue to work on Open G2P. We're trying to see how we can put it into multiple purposes and other uses. So now it serves not only as the forum for which we disseminate money to front-end workers as we did for the COVID-19, but we're now using it to make payments to schools under another project called performance-based financing. So working with MOSIP, I'm happy Ramesh is on this panel, we are actually using it to put it into multiple uses for the benefit of the community that we serve.
Okay, understand. I had promised the MOI of Kenya that we will stop at 6 o'clock. Therefore, I want to call one last member of the panel. You have seen her. She's Gail Hodges. She's the executive chairman of the Open ID Foundation. And I'd like you, Gail, to share with us just one question, answer one question. What does it mean to be open? Yes, you have to answer this in 3 minutes.
I have to answer it in less than 5 minutes and everyone's going to drinks, right? So they're
Yes.
carefully listening to everything I say. Lovely to be back here again on stage, and thank you, Joseph, and peer panelists. So for the Open ID Foundation to be open, we are ourselves an open standards body. And so it's in our DNA to do everything in the most open way we possibly can. There's no barriers to entry for people to contribute to our specifications. It costs absolutely nothing. An individual or an entity can contribute to the open standards. It's also consensus-based, so any decisions on what should exactly go into a line of the protocol is based on the consensus view of the community participating in the development of that standard.
So that's your governance. You're talking about the importance of governance for something to be open, right?
It's within, yeah, government for, so it's within the governance of our organization.
Governance of your organization.
Exactly, that when creating the standards itself, literally the DNA of the protocol, that it is consensus-based and it doesn't become a formal specification, a draft specification, or a final standard unless it has the consensus view of the community. Mm-hmm. And everyone has a vote. You know, if one chooses to be a member, for which you can be a member for as little as $50 as an individual member, and then there's corporate memberships. But even between the individuals and the corporate entities, they each get one vote. So it's an equalizing force on the participation in the development of those standards. It's also globally open, so we have participation from all around the world. I am literally here today to find more technical geeks. Hopefully there are some of you out there, because we'd like more members and contributors from the African community. But having that global perspective ensures that our standards are fit for purpose for deployments all around the world, which is what I was talking about yesterday. But every step of the way, there's no gatekeeping. It is all open, even the drafts, all the conversations, all the notes are all published and freely available for anyone to review, to comment on, and to join the conversation, or just to lurk and to learn from the rest of the thought leaders and to take part. I really took heart from His Excellency's comments this morning around the 30 million individuals that are coming out of the great universities of this continent and who can take part in open standards bodies like the Open ID Foundation and bring their expertise into our group and into that of the other groups that are on the stage here. I'd also like to take a moment to say that we're kind of, I feel that we are friends with everyone. So we are delighted to, to have OSHA selecting the Open ID Connect standard as part of their solution. I'm also delighted that in February, MOSIP has selected some of our standards as well. And I think that that is a tribute to the work of the Open ID Foundation, but also a tribute to this global effort to
can contribute to the development of this asset, whether we call it the OSIA asset or whether we call it the MOSIP asset. It's very important that being open means welcome to everybody, and that we have a governance that actually establishes if this is an advancement that helps us move forward as a community, we adopt it, we ratify it. If it's not, we basically push it back for re-review or reject it. So unfortunately, we are reaching the end. As you could see, every single one of these panels, we could go on for hours and hours. So I'm forced to end. Just let me say, today and yesterday, we have journeyed together for a very, very long time, not in physical time, but in the amount of knowledge that we have acquired. I think in 2 days, we have acquired, in my opinion, the analog of several months of knowledge. So it is compressed. So that's why I encourage you to go to the live casts, which are in replay. So you can, whatever sections you missed, please go back and review them. And also, I want to make an open invitation to all of you to become more active into the livecast platforms. Come to us and tell us what topics do you want us to deal with and what topics you can contribute to. Our strength is derived from your participation. So we need you to participate fully because together we can make progress. Our commitment is to be totally impartial. We want to bring everybody to the fold, and we will let the merit decide what choices and what options. Having been in this for a long, long time, I can tell you in the world in which we operate, there is no right and wrong. There are choices to make and consequences to deal with. So we want to make sure that the choices we make and the consequences are always the shortest path towards success. Together, we are going to succeed. So I'm glad to continue this journey with you. Tomorrow, we have 4 workshops, so the format is going to be different. This tent is going to be split into 2 sections. It'll be noise insulated with a no man's land in between. So there will be one part which will deal with workshop 1, another part with workshop 2, and then in the afternoon, we'll switch again. The workshops are run as a collaboration, lots of discussion, lots of roundtable analysis, and we're hoping that there will be recommendations and outputs that I will feature on the live casts on June 7 and June 21st. So thank you very much, and please, round of applause to this wonderful, wonderful panel that we've had. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Shaheen, thank you so much. Always. Thank you. Thank you.
Africa amuka, oh mama. Africa amuka, Africa amuka, Africa amuka, oh mama.